Hello and welcome to 6 Part. Today I'm gonna continue the story What If Deku Became the Iron Fist Part 3. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Standing atop a water tower with a view of the expansive city of Hosu was a man. For now, this was his hunting territory. This man, who wore a cloth mask over his face and a velowing red scarf, was known as the hero killer Stain. From multiple knives to the sword on his back, his body was slathered with blades. His red eyes searched the city for the next hero he would eliminate. They referred to themselves as heroes, but they weren't deserving. Everyone else was nothing, and only one man deserved that title. Stain pulled out his sword and slashed through the air, but it missed its mark. A man-shaped vortex was standing there when he looked to the left. "Calm yourself, hero killer. My name is Kurogiri and I would like to offer you an invitation on behalf of the League of Villains." Stain glanced at Kurogiri and pulled his sword away. Stain said, "Very well then, lead on." Kurogiri's mist engulfed him, leaving him in the center of a bar. The only other person there was a young man wearing a mask made of his hand over his face. As he glanced around the bar, he saw an All Might poster in ruins. As Stain's eyes began to light up, Tamura said, "Welcome, hero killer. I am Tamura Shigaraki, leader of the League of Villains." To Tamura's annoyance, Stain said, "So you're the ones who attacked Ua and were defeated." Kurogiri intervened when he noticed the growing tension before Tamura said something that might have ruined the situation. As Stain looked at him, Kurogiri clarified, "Yes, we had a setback at the time and many of our soldiers were arrested, but with you on our side we know more will gather." Before turning to face Tamura, Stain remarked, "I see now, you want me to help put the pieces of your shattered league back together." Shigaraki shrugged and Stain said, "As the leader of this league, tell me, what is your purpose? What drives you?" Shigaraki held up a picture of a green-haired boy in a Ua gym uniform, Izuku Midoriya, and said, "I just want to destroy anything that pisses me off. All Might, and little shits like this especially." Stain recognized the man in the picture. They had only met once and it had been a brief encounter, but the image of the green-haired boy who had stepped up to stop him from purging those vile criminals had lingered in his mind. "What knowledge do you have about that boy?" As Shigaraki sneered, Stain stepped forward and asked. "He must die because I know he is the reason our plan at USJ didn't work out." Stain glared at Shigaraki while resting his hands on his knives. "You are among the people I detest the most in the world, and I was foolish to believe you had a good cause. You murder because it annoys you. A child's reasoning is that the only justification for taking a life is to further a deserving cause." Although Shigaraki was a barely sprouted plant with no interest in long-term plans other than wanton destruction, Stain shouted as Kurogiri watched. This was their master's will, and hopefully having the hero killer around would push Shigaraki in the right direction, but it appeared that things would not work out as planned. "Should I intervene, master?" Kurogiri asked the screen behind the bar, and a voice came through the speakers. "Allow it to occur. He may not be able to learn and develop in any other way." As Kurogiri turned away from the screen, he felt a cut across his arm as the hero killer dragged his knife through his flesh and licked the blade to support himself on the bar top with one hand. Kurogiri's body instantly locked up, preventing him from moving or even activating his warp gate. Stain turned, stepping onto Tamura's right arm and stabbing into his left shoulder before the two fell to the bar's floor, Stain's knife in his shoulder and the other one dangerously near his neck. Desire and conviction are essential for achieving any goal. Those who lack it will always be weak, Stain remarked, gazing down at Shigaraki. "Aren't you being a bit rough, huh? Get rid of this guy, Kurogiri." Kurogiri made a fruitless attempt to comply with Tamura's request, but he was still unable to move. "I can't move, it must be the hero killer's quirk." Stain pulled his knife forward, but Tamura's hand caught the blade. "Now that I've seen what you have to offer, I'm not impressed, so I will dispose of you here and now. I'll kill you if you touch this palm." As Stain's knife started to break and turn to dust, Shigaraki uttered those words. Then, slapping his palm at Stain, the villain jumped back. "Killing All Might is my greatest desire, even though I may not have any convictions or anything else. I detest how people swarm to trash like him as if he were a prophet." Shigaraki gripped his injured shoulder and said, "The last of my wounds had finally healed and then you went and did this. I want to destroy their pillar of strength and watch as they are crushed beneath the rubble of their own hopelessness. It's not like we have a cleric in our party, so you ought to show more consideration." "Well, that's about as good as you get. Despite our apparent differences, we have similar objectives. We both agree that the present must be destroyed, Stain remarked, putting his last knife away. Stop teasing me. Go ahead and drop dead. You think I'm the type of person you detest the most? Gazing at the hero killer, Shigaraki uttered those words. I wanted to see how strong you were. I've discovered that people are most truthful when they are close to passing away. You do have a desire and a perverted sense of conviction, even though it's abnormal. I might let you grow if it's still possible, and if you don't work out, I'll weed you out like the others. You believe that eliminating me will be as easy as pulling weeds from a garden? Kurogiri stood up straight, clutching at the cut on his arm as Shigaraki hissed, Kurogiri, I don't want some mad paladin in my party. Kurogiri felt his body return to control at this point. Kurogiri turned to face Tamura and attempted to refocus the conversation, saying, Tamura, he will be a great ally if he joins us. Stain interrupted. It appeared as though the two had reached some sort of agreement, but only time would tell. Return me to Hosu, I have several more heroes to deal with. Kurogiri opened a portal as asked, looking between the two once more. When Izuku opened his eyes and looked around, he saw that he was in the same dreamscape where he had met the previous one for all users. He could not make out the man's appearance, but he was fairly certain that it was the same aspect he had met during his match with Shinso. You're working really hard, kid, I like that. You're here once more. Why am I still unable to see you? The silhouette turned to face Izuku, who asked. You've come a long way, but you're still not ready. You truly put in a lot of work, and it shows. You're nearly there. Izuku decided to see what he could learn about something that had been on his mind for a while after looking at the figure in front of him. I thought I'd have to wait until another crisis came about to meet you, but if you keep going at this pace we'll be meeting very soon. So, do you teach All Might? Before the figure shook his head, Izuku asked. No, that wasn't me. His teacher, who is also present in this room, was a woman. As Izuku dipped his head in disappointment, he explained, she's even more excited to meet you than the rest of us. Izuku had hoped to learn more about his mentor, but he had other things to learn. Can you tell me anything about All Might? He says I'll have to fight All for One in the future. The name made the figure stiffen, and then he sighed and rubbed the back of his head. He is a jerk who takes advantage of others and lies. My best friend turned against me and our friends because of him. He helped me fight All for One after realizing how evil he was, but it was almost too late. In the end, he gave his life so that I could survive and pass on One for All. Izuku was feeling a weight in his chest as the size of his opponent became clear to him. The figure seemed to notice and shook his head. Don't worry, kid. Unlike the rest of us, you won't be alone. He's powerful and a genius. You won't ever see him until he's sure he can beat you. We'll do everything in our power to ensure that you're prepared, and we're all with you. Remind yourself of our immense power, and know that experience is at your fingertips. Izuku grinned as the place he was in started to disappear and he was roused to reality. As the boy awoke, Melissa gazed down into Izuku's green eyes and said, Izuku, did you train all night? Melissa frowned as she asked, and Izuku slowly sat up, noticing that his head had been resting on her lap. No, I think I stopped at midnight. Is it already morning? Observing the bags under Melissa's eyes, he inquired, well, Melissa, what time did you go to bed? Melissa blushed and then sighed as Izuku asked. Not wanting Izuku to know she was working on his suit until she was finished, she said, same, I think I was working on your I was working on a couple school projects late last night. Anyway, I guess congratulations are in order, because you've tripled your evasion score because of your late night training session. Now you're just over 60%. Although I should have known better, I didn't anticipate you reaching this milestone so quickly. As she helped Izuku stand up, the young hero stretched and gazed at the sea of rubber bullets on the floor before Melissa burst out laughing. Come on, let's get you a shower and something to eat and I'll explain the next stage of your training, Melissa said. Izuku could only shake his head as she said, don't worry about it. After they were outside, she pressed a button that opened a number of ports on the floor, sucking up the rubber bullets and reloading the turrets. The girl shoved him into the bathroom and said she would go get his clothes, so he went up to Melissa's room again and said, the wonders of our island will never cease to amaze me. Izuku joined Melissa at the dining table after getting dressed and bathed, and when he saw the enormous plate of pancakes, bacon, and eggs, he said, Melissa, I don't think I can eat all this. Melissa grinned. As Melissa placed her tablet on the table and tapped the glass, a hologram appeared between them. Izuku looked at the plate and said, oh yes you can, I've been monitoring your body and after that all-nighter you pulled you'll have no problem putting down that plate, now eat up while I explain what comes next. He was hungry, but he didn't think he was that hungry. Nevertheless, he didn't want to waste Melissa's efforts, so he poured syrup on his pancakes and started eating. You mentioned two things that worried you: controlling your speed and building strength. Izuku looked at the series of numbers and understood some of them, but the rest was Greek to him. The rest of your training will be performed in our gravity chamber, Melissa explained, bringing up the specifications on her father's inventions. This machine is able to increase the gravity in the room up to 100 times now. Seeing as you are way stronger than average, I say starting you at 40G would be good. With your raise in evasion, I think the first step is well to be completed, which means we can now multitask into the strength portion of your agenda. It would be equivalent to carrying slightly more than 3 tons at that gravity. That's amazing, Melissa. I can't believe something like that really exists, Izuku said, sitting there with his plate of food forgotten and gazing at her in wonder. Izuku gushed about the sheer awesomeness of the place he was in and said, "Island really is humanity's future." Melissa smiled at Izuku's excitement, recalling that same expression she had worn every time her dad demonstrated a new invention. As Izuku quickly cleared his plate, Melissa explained, "Yeah, my dad built it to help astronauts train for the possibility of colonizing other planets with vast differences in gravity." Izuku was eager to see this gravity chamber. "I guess you were correct, Melissa. I was more hungry than I had anticipated. Shall we go now?" Melissa sighed as Izuku, excited by this new phase in his training, asked. She stretched and went out with her tablet to show Izuku the gravity chamber, saying, "I guess there's no point in trying to slow you down. Otherwise you'll just go down there anyway." The two went down to the lab and to a door with a console next to it, and Melissa said, "Okay, go on in. It's better if you're already inside when I turn it on. Oh, and you might want to take off any unnecessary clothing for now. Wouldn't want your clothes leaving bruises or tearing off you as you move." Melissa felt as though the temperature in the room increased by 10 degrees. After he kicked off his shoes, he looked at Melissa, who was staring at him, and felt his own face get a little hotter. After realizing that Izuku had noticed her staring, she broke the moment by adjusting her glasses. "Anyway, once inside, just do your normal workout routine, and don't worry, I'll be right outside monitoring your vitals and everything." Izuku nodded and opened the door, looking around the large room, which seemed to be made of a sturdy material similar to plastic. Just before it felt like a boulder was dropped on his entire body, he heard a low hum start up, and then he dropped to his hands and knees before activating his full cowl. He took a deep breath and slowly stood up. The weight was still there but manageable. "Okay, let's train." Tenya Iida was strolling alongside Normal Hero Manuel, his mentor for the internship. "Yeah, I was kind of surprised that you chose to come to my agency. Not that I'm not happy to have you, but not much really happens here in Hosu." Tenya wasn't paying much attention to what Manuel had to say because he was only here to find and kill Stain in order to exact revenge on his brother Ingenium. Midoriya had been correct about what Iida had wanted, and he couldn't just stand by and let his brother go unpunished. Tenya was startled out of his violent thoughts by Manuel's shout. "I apologize, Manuel." "What did you say?" As Manuel examined the child, Iida inquired. Manuel waved his hands to the people on the streets and said, "Look, I know what happened to your brother, and I'm sorry, but don't let that distract you from what needs to be done. As heroes, it's our job to protect these people." As he resumed his walk with Iida at his heels, Manuel patted Iida's shoulder and said, "Remember that. We can't use our positions for personal gain. That's not what heroes do." A few days later, Stain stood on a rooftop overlooking Hosu City and said, "You brought us here to kill more heroes? Was this the significant matter you were discussing?" Shigaraki looked at Stain and asked. "You will now understand the meaning of conviction. I'll draw their attention because there are a lot of people who don't deserve the title of hero and nobody seems to care or notice." Leaping from the rooftop into the shadowed streets of Hosu, Stain declared, "These false idols are a cancer, and I am the scalpel to cut it out." As Tamura scratched at his neck, Kurogiri explained, "He has a point, Tamura. Wherever the hero killer has struck, crime rates drop soon after, as if the heroes are working harder to prove themselves." "That's fantastic that the heroes are putting in so much effort. How can the hero killer's breeding of new heroes benefit us, Kurogiri?" Shigaraki then took out a phone and dialed the only number on it, saying, "Master, could you please have a few Nomu? I don't care after tonight." Before hearing his master's voice in his ear, Shigaraki inquired. "Why?" With a smile on his face, All for One asked. "Because, Master, I have the right to destroy anything I don't like." Shigaraki answered before hearing the response from All for One. 3 portals opened behind Shigaraki as he said, "Very well, Tamura, but I'll only give you 3. Use them wisely." The first was a hulking brute that resembled the first, but the top half of its head was just brain without eyes. The second was spindly and walked on all fours with eyes seated directly in its brain. The third was also slender but walked on two legs with its brain and eyes exposed, just like its brethren. Go, Nomu, and demolish Hosu City. As the three beasts raced out into the city to wreak havoc, Shigaraki gave the order, let's see if your honor will survive this hero killer. Laughing into the night, Shigaraki said. When Tenya saw the plume of smoke rising above the skyline, he wondered what might be the cause, but that thought vanished when he saw a flash of red in an alleyway. Tenya, who was once again with Manuel this evening, hurried after the pro-hero as they ran towards the site and sounds of explosions. He stopped instantly and turned, ducking into the alley and running full tilt down until he saw the target of his hatred. Stain, who was standing with his knife in the pro-hero native's shoulder. And who are you? He asked, turning to face Iida. Iida slowly reached up and removed his helmet to meet the hero killer's gaze as Stain pointed his sword at him. I am a hero's younger brother whom you hurt. Ingenium is his name, and he might never be able to walk again as a result of you. Iida yelled, his eyes brimming with rage. Children have no place here, boy. Stain said, I'll give you one chance to leave. Native fell to the ground. Get help, kid, run, as Iida gazed at Stain, Native yelled. Every waking moment, this moment has been on my mind. As Stain looked down at him, Iida remarked, I'm thinking of what I'd say to you when I found you, what I'd do. Iida turned his gaze from Stain to Native and grinned as he said, and what have you decided on? If you give me the wrong answer I won't hesitate to purge you along with this filth here. When I first found you, I vowed to kill you and exact revenge on my brother, but now that I'm here, all I can think about is something a close friend recently said to me. I didn't want to hear it at the time, but right now it's all I can think about, so I think I'm going to do as he says. Stain stared at Iida bewildered. He had just a moment before seen only rage and retaliation in this boy's eyes, but now he saw only icy resolve. A hero defends others, he told me. Saving the innocent is more important than punishing the guilty, and I am unable to flee because of those words. That's what heroes do, sir, so I'll save you. Iida yelled as he put on his helmet and then assumed a running position. With a broad smile, Stain turned to face Iida and said, I see. Well, then, good luck, hero. Stain pointed his sword at Iida as he spoke. Iida gazed at Stain through the eyes of his helmet as he combed through all the information he knew about the villain. He had done as much research as he could before his internship, and all he could find was that the hero killer was proficient with all types of blades and that he always had at least 3 victims in any city he was in, all of whom had stab and slash wounds. However, what stuck with Iida the most was what Midoriya said. Iida, I've fought Stain and he uses techniques like mine. Knowing this would give him an advantage, but not significantly, he needed to make every second matter. As he assumed a running stance, Iida thought to himself, I just need to get Native out of here, I don't have to beat him. Come on, boy, if you can, save this filth. Stain smirked as he leapt above Iida and yelled, you know I let your brother live in hopes that he would serve as a warning to this world of fake heroes. But still nothing has changed, as Iida charged forward in pursuit of an engine-powered roundhouse. Perhaps your passing will have a greater effect. As the young hero ducked to the side and ran along the wall towards Native, Stain snarled and kicked forward the spikes on the toe of his boot, ripping at Iida's costume. It's almost there. As he reached for the pro, Iida mentally yelled, but had to break off when Stain materialized in front of him, almost impaling him with his blade. You didn't anticipate it being that simple, did you? Stain asked, his eyes meeting Iida's, and Iida gritted his teeth as he glanced between Stain and Native. Stain wasn't as fast as Iida, but he was close enough that he couldn't rely solely on his speed as he had intended. As he rushed forward, jumping off the wall, sailing over Stain as if heading for Native again, Iida thought to himself, I need a plan. I should have known that my speed wasn't enough to defeat Midoriya, so why would it work against someone even more skilled? I need a plan. Just as Iida reached his zenith, Iida activated his engines, directing him straight down at Stain, his foot coming down on the villain who blocked with the side of his sword, feeling Iida's weight crash onto him before noticing the grin on Iida's face. Recipro has now exploded. Iida shouted, activating his last-ditch move, propelling himself at Native using Stain's sword as a leaping-off point, the force of his acceleration snapping the villain's sword as he flew towards Native, grabbing hold of the hero as Iida's feet hit the ground and they took off towards the mouth of the alley. I'm going to make it. Iida pondered for a moment before experiencing excruciating pain in one leg, which caused him to trip and fall, dropping Native in the process. The pro dropped to the ground and rolled like a rag doll. That youngster made a good effort. As he approached the two, Stain said, I didn't expect something so crafty from a kid like you. Iida looked down at his leg and saw the knife embedded in his flesh. I commend your effort, it was truly heroic and for that, I will let you live. Stain pulled a knife from one of his many holsters and said, but that piece of garbage is too far gone and must be cleansed. Iida watched the blade move in slow motion, and without even realizing it, his body seemed to move on its own, throwing him over native as he felt the knife bite deep into his back. A groan echoed through Iida's teeth as he clenched his jaw and bit back his scream. Kid, stop, I'm not worth this, so leave. Stain stood a few feet away, stunned by what he had just witnessed. This child had thrown himself in the path of his blade without hesitation. Native yelled, looking at the child defending him from this madman at the risk of his own life. You are a much more deserving brother of Ingenium than your brother. I do not wish to murder you. Get out of here and let me finish up. As he stood over Native, who was still under Iida's protection, Stain remarked, that idiot, it seems you won't be the only person I kill tonight. Move, he said, looking up at the sound of an explosion. Iida shook his head and Stain yelled. I won't. I will not allow you to murder him, Iida yelled, picturing Midoriya and the extent he would go to in this circumstance. Stain raised his broken sword and said, very well, child, have it your way. The ragged edge of the blade caught the moonlight before Stain brought it down, but a shuriken that had lodged itself in the wall across from the hero killer knocked the sword off course. At the end of the alley, a man wearing a red kimono, a hood over his face, and a straight cane with a jade pommel in front of him said, I think that's enough sake. Stain turned away from his two prisoners, his eyes glaring at the stranger before recognition came to him. Stain walked forward to stand in front of the new man and said, Yoshi, I see you've returned to Japan. Didn't you give up playing hero after failing to kill me? As Yoshi raised his head, his amber eyes gleaming in the darkness of his hood, Stain asked. Yoshi wasn't let down by me. Despite seeing you here and now, I still thought you could change, so I gave you a chance to improve. Iida gazed at the two before listening to the newcomer speak. I know that is no longer possible, and all the death you caused is my fault, so I will take responsibility for it, Yoshi said calmly to his opponent. Take that man, boy, and get out of here. Yoshi opened his eyes and looked at Stain, saying, don't look back or stop no matter what. He then turned to face Iida and smiled gently, saying, Izuku would be very unhappy to see you injured. Yoshi then locked his cane with Stain's blade without even looking. Iida slowly got up, but the knives in his back and leg made it difficult for him to move, so he put his hand on the wall and leaned Native against him, slowly hobbling out of the alley to the sound of battle behind him. Yoshi shouted, swiping Stain's sword away before punching Stain's diaphragm. The villain let out an audible gasp. I must continue to move. I need to get out of here and find help. Iida's breaths were becoming harder and heavier, but he refused to stop. His leg felt like it was burning, and his warm blood was leaking through his suit, sticking to him like a second skin. The alleyway's view was becoming blurry, but Iida continued to move. Iida told himself, a hero protects the innocent. A hero protects the innocent. Something flew by Iida's ear, but he continued to move. A hero protects the innocent. Now that the alley's entrance was just a few feet away, Iida could see the street's lights and hear the voices of heroes at work. A hero protects the innocent. He and Native fell to the ground outside the entrance as Iida attempted to lift his foot, but the limb was numb and covered in drugs. Hey, who's that? As Iida tried to pull himself farther, someone yelled. There's a man fighting, he needs a help. Hey kid, you're safe now, so relax. Bring an ambulance over here, please. That same hero yelled. Iida. This voice was familiar to Iida as his vision gradually grew hazy. Heroes gathered around Iida as she passed out on the concrete, waiting for first responders, while others went into the alley to look into Iida's claim of fighting. Manuela, I'm sorry. TCH escaped. Will you take another half measure on me now, Yoshi? Don't you see that the only way the world will recognize a true hero is if I do what I'm doing? After shouting, Stain dropped his broken sword to get a pair of knives and slashed at Yoshi, who deftly parried with his cane before attempting a sweep that Stain jumped into the air to avoid. Yoshi then retaliated with his shuriken. Sake, you're mistaken. Although they might not be flawless, these heroes, some of whom are genuinely heroica, are trying their hardest to assist. Yoshi looked at Stain, who smiled, and said, you saw it just now, and I know you've seen it in my student. I cannot dispute that. Your boy and Ingenium's younger brother both have the heart of a real hero, but for every hero like them, there are dozens of fakers. The balance is too skewed, so I'll keep up my moral work until there are no more fakes. Will you stop me, Yoshi? Yoshi mimicked Stain's motion by raising his cane as he said, raising his knives. With the sound of clashing metal echoing through the alley, The two stared each other down before leaping towards each other, saying, I won't let you continue this, Yoshi, no matter what it takes. Grasping the side of the doorway as he passed through the gravity chamber, Izuku looked at the 100G readout on the monitor next to the door and grinned as he turned to face Melissa, who gave him a bottle of water. You did it. I can't believe it's 100 grams. You really are incredible, you know that, Melissa said, blushing as she looked at Izuku's bare, sweaty chest. I know you had a bit of a head start, but in 4 days you maxed out the machine. This is unprecedented, she said, glancing at her tablet before turning to smile at Izuku. You are truly remarkable, Melissa. Without you, I couldn't have accomplished this. The older girl blushed as he put his hand to her cheek and said, Our promise drove me to this. Melissa turned to the case on the lab table and said, Oh, that reminds me, I've finished your suit. Well, mostly finished. I'll probably be up the rest of the night putting on the finishing touches. She felt Izuku grab her hand. He said simply but firmly, Melissa, it's time. Melissa sighed and nodded her head. As Izuku took a seat across from her, she said, A promise is a promise, I suppose. Melissa told him, Okay, go ahead, tell me what you wanted to say back then. She couldn't believe how long it had been. Izuku had been here for a week tomorrow, and he would be leaving that afternoon. It felt like they had been together for months, but it also felt like no time had passed since she had met him in her father's lab days ago, and now he would be leaving her. It was all too much, but Melissa had to focus so that nothing would change her feelings for him. Izuku, who had been considering how to say that practically non-stop during his training, decided to be as direct and honest as possible when he said, I have ya. Girlfriends, as 6 of them to be exact. He had closed his eyes as tightly as he could, unsure of what to expect, but after a few moments of silence, he opened one eye to look at Melissa, who appeared to be sitting in a state of shock, her eyes glazed as her mouth closed and opened repeatedly like a fish out of water. I am Melissa? Izuku asked, reaching out to touch her, but the girl sat up straight and flinched away from his hand as if his voice had reset her. You say there are 6 of them. Izuku, you have 6 girlfriends? So that girl you were talking to a few days ago was one of them? Melissa asked, and Izuku nodded shamefully. And you want me to be your girlfriend too? Melissa asked, and Izuku nodded while glancing at her as she mentally sorted everything out. Melissa asked, glancing at Izuku, who shook his head without hesitation. I understand how it may sound, but I promise you that I'm not a philanderer. I truly adore each and every one of them, and even though I've only known you for a few days, Melissa, it feels like we've been together for a lot longer. You inspire me to meet all of your high standards because you are so enthusiastic about science. Izuku blushed wildly as he said, I really like you, Melissa, and I want to be with you if you'll have me. Melissa looked at Izuku, and the unvarnished honesty he radiated made it both terrifying and thrilling to look him in the eyes when he was in this state. Do you realize how absurd this sounds, Izuku? 1 man, 6 women, no, 7 women, including me. Actually, when viewed from a scientific perspective, it's not as strange as it seems. Still, harems are not as rare as people believe. Sitting down, Melissa looked at Izuku and said, I want to believe you, Izuku. I do, Buddha. Melissa trailed off, saying that she had no disagreement other than her feelings, and that didn't seem like enough. I didn't inherit my quirk, it was given to me. Melissa glanced at Izuku adjusting her glasses and looked up from the floor, saying, Come again. Izuku inhaled deeply as she posed the question. I wasn't born with the peculiarity I currently possess. Izuku bit his lip as he attempted to speak the truth aloud. I apologize, All Might. I was given this quirk by a. Izuku lamented, but he knew that it would take a leap of faith for Melissa to trust him, and he cared for her enough to risk everything. My quirk was given to me by Al. Cease. Melissa shouted, covering Izuku's mouth with her palms as her clear blue eyes full of tears stared into Izuku's green ones. Just stop. Melissa took her hands away from Izuku's mouth and said, I believe you love me and all the girls you have with you, so stop. You were about to tell me something really painful, weren't you? Melissa's words were a factual statement rather than a question, and she could see it on your face. She grabbed Izuku's hand and saw the tiny streams of blood flowing from the spot where he had clenched it into a fist. Whatever you were about to tell me was truly painful to the point you were forcing yourself to say anything, she said. How could I not believe you if you were prepared to endure such excruciating pain for me alone? She picked up Izuku's fist, which felt so rough and hard against her soft palms. Melissa kissed each of Izuku's knuckles before covering his hand with hers and saying, I'm yours, Izuku. She then moved forward to kiss him on the lips, and Izuku joyfully accepted her, drawing her close to him as they kissed, trying their best to release all of their pent-up passion. Melissa seemed to melt into Izuku's warm, hard body, paying particular attention to the bulge in his pants resting against her crotch while she sat in his lap. "Is that all Izuku is for me?" she questioned, allowing her hand to move down his chest, across his torso, and then land on the beast in his trousers. Izuku stammered, trying to be clever. "Well, you're the only one around, so I guess so." Melissa laughed and got up, grabbing Izuku's hand and pulling him along as they rode the elevator to the house she shared with her father. She couldn't believe that this would be one of her last times with Izuku, but she couldn't concentrate on that at the moment because the doors opened to reveal her house, and she walked into it, looking over her shoulder at Izuku as she led him to her room, opening the door and admiring the jumble of papers, notes, sketches, and other items. She really ought to have cleaned up before this, but before she could complain about her messy bedroom, she was lifted into the air in Izuku's powerful arms before the two fell onto her bed. She blushed as Izuku looked at the simple brassiere she had chosen to wear that day, another decision she would later regret, and his fingers quickly undid the rest of her shirt, spreading it open, then moved to her bra, undoing the clip in the front so her bust could sway free of its confines. Izuku wasted no time in attacking her neck, his lips dancing her along her throat as he began unbuttoning the blue button-down shirt she had worn that day, chasing each button with a kiss to the newly exposed skin until he reached her bra. After a moment of staring, Izuku cupped a tit in each hand and began to gently massage her orbs, his fingers dancing across her nipples, causing Melissa to writhe on the bed, her thighs rubbing against each other. "Izuku," she moaned out as Izuku smiled down at her, releasing her breasts for the time being as his hands moved to her pants, undoing the button before sliding them down her legs, revealing her creamy limbs and plaid panties. Izuku chuckled at the sight, causing Melissa to blush. "Don't laugh." Before Izuku grabbed one of her legs and began kissing it from her ankle all the way up to the junction of her legs, she said, batting him with her calves. Izuku reached for his shorts he'd been wearing for his training and slid them down, revealing his thick, throbbing cock standing straight as an arrow in direct defiance of gravity and pointed straight at Melissa's cunt. "Condoms," Izuku said to Melissa, who was preoccupied with evaluating Izuku's member, as she felt his breath puffing against her needy cunt and then slid her panties off her, noticing the string of arousal connecting the item of clothing to her pussy before it snapped free. What?" Melissa shivered in anticipation as Izuku leaned forward and pressed his cock flush against her slit, asking, "Are there condoms with you?" Melissa shook her head no, and Izuku whispered against her ear. Izuku panted against her for a moment, processing what she had said, and then he grabbed hold of his member, lined it up with Melissa's pussy, and slowly began sliding into her folds. Melissa curled her toes at the new sensation she was experiencing, and it was amazing until she felt Izuku tear her hymen. It hurt a little, but she had felt worse when she had experimented and had those experiments blow up in her face. "And no, I have an eye implant," she said, feeling Izuku's member lying against her in this way, jumbled her brain, barely allowing her to string words together. He didn't want Melissa to be in any more pain than necessary, so he resisted the urge to jackhammer her cunt for the time being. Melissa groaned as he felt the tight confines of her pussy grip his cock, massaging every inch, begging for him to explode inside her. Melissa smiled at Izuku, seeing the boy holding himself back for her benefit, and she whispered to him, "It's okay. I'm ready to take it all." She then pressed her lips flush with his, even going so far as to deepen it by tasting every inch of Izuku's mouth as he did the same to her. She could tell he had practiced because he thoroughly dominated her tongue with his own before the two pulled away. Izuku threaded his fingers through Melissa's hair, feeling the silky strands flow through his fingers as he thrust in and out of her moist pussy. With a sun-like smile, he sat up and looked down at Melissa, who never wanted to be without his smile. Izuku pulled Melissa to his chest, making her sit in his lap, and he thrust up into her, causing her to yell as he struck her at a new angle. Melissa wrapped her legs around Izuku's waist, squeezing him tightly, trying to force even more of him into her cunt as she panted in his ear, her sweat-stained hair lying against her back and across her forward as Izuku gripped her ass, pounding her hard and fast. "Melissa, is GG going to come?" Melissa smiled broadly as Izuku hissed into her shoulder and then planted a kiss on it. "Go ahead, inside, it's okay." She screamed in pleasure loud enough to wake the dead, then she sank her teeth into Izuku's shoulder as the boy sped up, causing Melissa to feel a rush of warmth surge into her core. Then, as the two fell back to the bed on their sides facing each other, Melissa's legs were entangled with Izuku, and they both grinned and looked at each other. After Izuku brushed the hair from Melissa's eyes, the girl realized that her glasses were missing and started to look around before finding them on the floor and putting them back so she could properly look Izuku in the eye. "Hi," she said, then started laughing at how ridiculously small that word seemed after what they had done. Izuku joined her in a quiet giggle and then said, "Hi." The two then started another round of laughter. Slowly, the two fell asleep, with Izuku wrapping his arms around Melissa and falling asleep. But the older girl had only pretended to sleep until Izuku had fallen asleep, at which point she quietly pulled herself from his embrace and threw her blanket over him. She got to her feet, almost falling on her face as the feeling slowly returned to her legs and she felt Izuku's gift trickle down her leg. She blushed at the thought, changed again, and awkwardly made her way to the lab, where she had a suit to finish. Despite the fact that his flight was about to depart, Izuku couldn't help but stare into Melissa's stunning blue eyes as they stood hand in hand in the island airport. Melissa kissed Izuku, interrupting his sentence and pressing the case containing his new suit into his chest. Holding his hand and caressing the red bracelet on his wrist, she said, "Don't say anything, it'll be too hard. Besides, you're wearing my property, you're going to have to come back to get it repaired. Go make the world a better place." She pushed him in the direction of the airport gate. "And tell Uncle Might I said hello." Izuku waved at Melissa until he entered the airplane's hallway. Melissa said, "I will, of course." As he disappeared from view, Izuku said, "I'll be thinking about you, Melissa." Melissa stood there, her hand waving slowly, then stopped, took a deep breath, turned, and walked away. As Melissa wiped away a few tears that still lingered, she thought, "I'll see him again, I know I will." She was returning home, which would feel so much more empty now. Izuku jolted in his seat as the plane took off, saying, "I didn't get Melissa's number. She thinks of everything." Izuku smirked and shook his head, saying in a harsh whisper as he sank back into his seat and checked his phone to see that he had an alert. Thinking it was a missed call or text from one of the girls, he opened it to see Melissa's name and number added to his contacts. "Welcome back, young Midoriya. I hope your time with Melissa was productive." Izuku walked into the airport with his hero suitcase in his left hand and his duffel bag on one shoulder, wondering if his mother had come to greet him. Instead, he saw All Might in his true form. "You're going to have to get over that ASAP if you're going to be the #1 hero kid," All Might said, attributing Izuku's blush to his typical meekness after spending so much time with a woman. As he followed All Might to their cab, Izuku recollected his training and clenched his fist around the handle of his case in excitement, ready to show off his development to his mentor. Yes, All Might, quite the eye-opener. Before biting the bullet, All Might remarked, "I'm glad to hear that, young man. We won't be stopping at your house just yet." Izuku's eyes widened in surprise at All Might's statement. "We have to make a detour to the hospital because there are some people who would like to speak with you." "All Might? Who is waiting for me at the hospital? What do you mean?" All Might glanced at his charge and put a hand on his shoulder as Izuku spoke, his voice rising with nervousness. "Calm down, Midoriya. It's serious, but nothing life-threatening. I apologize for being asked to keep quiet." Izuku sat back and took a deep breath as the two of them drove silently to Dagoba Hospital. Izuku got out of the car to get his belongings, but All Might shook his hand and said, "Don't worry, Midoriya, I'll be waiting here for you when you're done." The #1 hero then gave Izuku the room numbers of the people he would be seeing. "Midoriya, I didn't expect you so soon," Izuku said, approaching the hospital desk to ask for directions to the first room he was supposed to visit before making his way there. He stood in front of the door before knocking, and the voice he heard telling him to come in calmed him down. Izuku opened the door and saw Iida lying in a bed with a book in his hand and his bandaged leg propped up on pillows. "I assume you just stepped off the aircraft. You must be worn out from your trip, and I wish you hadn't hurried over here." Tenya expressed concern for his friend's physical health. "Whatever happened to Iida?" Izuku said, settling into the chair beside Iida's bed. The taller boy sighed and turned to face Izuku. "Well, Midoriya, as you probably guessed, I didn't follow your advice. Let's get right to the point. I had every intention of finding and punishing my older brother when I started my internship." Iida swallowed his throat, which had suddenly dried up. "You know the saying, those who go looking for blood tend to find it, and I did." Iida said, "I practiced what I would say to the hero killer when I met him, what I would do when I came face to face with him, but I only thought of your words when I did. Considering how a hero is meant to defend others, my rage and desire for retribution seemed so insignificant in comparison to what you said." Izuku looked up at Iida as he said, "I know I shouldn't have gone after Stain. He could have easily killed me and would have if not for your master." Iida said, "All I wanted was to save Native and I did." "Was Master Splinter present?" Izuku asked, holding onto the necklaces he always wore. "Yes, he was, and he prevented Native and I from dying." Iida looked at Izuku and said, "I wanted to see you before school started because I want to tell you how thankful I am for you." Without him, we'd be dead, I'm sure of it. I would have killed myself without getting even with my brother or saving Native if it weren't for your words that day. I sincerely thank you, Midoriya, and I promise to uphold the standard of what a hero truly is moving forward because without you, I would have died a genuinely meaningless death. Iida said, bending as much as he could to avoid ripping the stitches in his back. Izuku put a hand on Iida's shoulder and sighed, saying, I'm just relieved you're okay, Iida. Tell me about your injuries. Izuku inquired as Iida let out a sigh. When everything was taken into account, I got off fairly easily. Some of the doctors believe that I intentionally cut myself in the back, but it didn't harm anything important. Additionally, I was stabbed in the leg, which I've been informed will cause some long-term nerve damage. Surgery can fix it, but I'm going to hold off until I've developed into the kind of hero my brother would be proud of. Looking at his bandaged leg, Izuku placed his hand on Iida's shoulder and said, this is my punishment, and I accept it. I caused a lot of trouble for Manuel because of my selfishness. Izuku looked at Iida and said, I think you should get the surgery now. After what you told me, there's no way your brother wouldn't be proud of you. Sure, you started off wrong, but you later realized that and made the right decision. That's significant. Iida wiped his eyes and coughed as he glanced down at Izuku's compliment. Iida told him he had a lot on his mind and said, thank you for that, Midoriya. I'll think on it. Well, Iida, I hope you get better and I look forward to seeing you at school. Izuku got up and opened Iida's door, looking at the other room number on the paper All Might had given him. Also, you'll be on trash duty for the next week class rep's orders, he said. It's your punishment. Izuku grinned as he looked over his shoulder, and Iida reciprocated. I'm entitled to it. I promise not to disappoint you. Izuku laughed as he went to Master Splinter's room and knocked once there. Iida said, regaining some of his robotic movements. Izuku heard his master say, enter. He was lying in a hospital bed, staring out the window, when Izuku opened the door and entered. Master Splinter said, welcome back, my pupil. Izuku sat down beside his bed. Master, it's nice to see you. Izuku was about to bow in appreciation when Splinter interrupted him to look at the young man with the green hair. First and foremost, I must thank you for saving my friend's life. Izuku, you have no reason to thank me. I did nothing more than tidy up my own mess. I was supposed to take care of Sake, but I put things off and let him get out of control. Izuku stared at the bandaged stump for what seemed like hours as his mind refused to comprehend what he was seeing. Saving your friend was part of my repentance, as was this, Splinter said, lifting the stump where his left hand had been. Izuku looked at Splinter, who had a soft smile on his face, and said, Master Splinter, your hand is gone. Yoshi teased his youngest student, Izuku, saying, thank you for that astute observation, Izuku. Izuku's mind finally caught up with the present before he began to spew words. Master Splinter, I apologize for saying something so foolish. Before mentioning a young scientist he knew well, Izuku remarked, I'm sure you can get a new one what with the advancements in prosthetics. In fact, I can make a call to someone who I'm sure would be more than happy to help, he said. Izuku pulled out his phone and said, here, I'll call her right now. Splinter grabbed it out of his hand and gave him a quick flick of the forehead just for good measure. Master Splinter chuckled as Izuku gathered himself, saying, that is unnecessary, Izuku. After all, even with one hand I can still beat any of my students. Master Splinter, what became of Stain? Izuku inquired as Yoshi reflected on that evening. The hero killer gripped his face as he stared at the blurry image that was Splinter. Splinter raised his cane to block Stain's knives, then drove his palm into the villain's stomach, sending him flying back as Stain launched his knives at Yoshi, who dodged to the side and ran along the wall, going for a roundhouse kick that Stain ducked under, turning around to drive his knife into Splinter's back, only to be blinded by the powder. Stain's demise resulted from this brief diversion since he failed to act quickly enough to prevent the heroes from encircling him. Sir, please take a step back. Looking at the hero killer, a female hero said as she moved in front of Yoshi. As he recognized the shapes of different heroes, Stain rubbed his eyes and said, come on, if you think you fake heroes can stop me. There is only one hero who deserves to kill me. As the heroes rushed in, Stain yelled and stepped forward. He leapt from the wall and spun past the group of heroes, his knives flashing like lightning as he cut across each one. Yoshi knew what would happen, though, and as Stain licked his blades, the heroes fell to the ground limp. It's over now, Stain yelled, lowering his blade on the closest hero, but was halted when it sank deeply into Hamato Yoshi's left wrist, almost severing it completely. Oroku Sake, I won't let you. The villain felt all of his strength leave his body as he fell onto his back. Splinter yelled as he poked several points on Stain's body. Yoshi. Stain shouted, his voice resonating off the alley's walls. After that, they took Sake away, and I was brought here. I don't regret it, but the doctors were powerless to save my hand. In my opinion, losing a hand as retribution for my error from years ago is a minor cost. Splinter laughed and put his hand on Izuku's head, saying, I'm sure your friend told you that your words motivated him to be a real hero. They also planned to arrest me until they discovered that I had no quirk, so they had to let me go, though I did have to persuade them not to arrest Raphael because he threatened to beat their heads in if they came near me. Izuku, I feel the same way. I've come here because I've watched you grow over the years. Yoshi bowed his head to Izuku, whose eyes were filled with tears as he held his master's hand. I thought I would have to kill Sake to right my wrong, but you showed me there was another way, and for that I thank you. Master Splinter, you're welcome. Izuku let out a gasp. All Might, the #1 hero, merely patted Izuku on the back as they rode to Izuku's house after Izuku left the hospital and got back into the taxi. When the students returned to UA the following day, they were all eager to share their internship experiences with the others. Izuku entered the classroom, glancing at Iida, who felt his presence and held up a hand to greet him. Midori, how was Island? The boy was startled by Mina's abrupt appearance, so she slung an arm over his shoulder and asked. As Mina grinned at him, he blushed and said, Oh, it was nice, I learned a lot. Izuku grinned as well, looking past her, locking eyes with Momo, Jiro, Tsuyu, Ochako, and he assumed Toru as well. He then went to his desk as Aizawa entered. Ooh, I bet you did. You'll have to tell me all about it. Better yet, you should show me, she said with a predatory grin. Welcome back. Your first class will be an assessment of your newly gained knowledge, so you had better learn a lot from your internships. As the students prepared for their next lesson, Aizawa said, Get into your suits and meet All Might at Training Ground Gamma. She was drinking from a juice pouch. To the interest of his classmates, Izuku emerged from the locker room wearing a full bodysuit with green belt around his waist and green wrist and ankle bands. Did something happen to your suit, Izuku? I believe that Donnie, your brother, had made you a new one. As the class's girls gazed at Izuku's skin-tight bodysuit and drooled, noticing that he had gained muscle from his training, Ojiro posed the question. Oh no, but Melissa Shield made me a new suit that includes these belts and wrist and ankle bands. Izuku's armor was primarily emerald green with spirals of black on his arms and legs, and his faceplate was black as well. The wristbands expanded, spiraling up his arms all the way to his shoulder and down around his hands, while the ankle bands climbed up his legs and around his feet, and the belt expanded, linking up with the armor on his legs and arms before coming up as a faceplate covering the lower half of his face. Enact, Izuku ordered as lights came to life on the green accessories. The Izuku's new suit stunned everyone in 1A. What the hell? Man, that is incredible. Looking at Izuku's armor with what could be described as green envy, Denki remarked. The faceplate around Izuku's mouth split apart and slid back so he could speak clearly. I agree, Izuku. Your armor is truly state-of-the-art. Iida agreed, feeling a little underdressed in comparison to his friend. As All Might clapped to get the students' attention, he said, Thanks guys, Melissa calls it the full armor. Let's maintain our focus, kids. Dave, you've been snatching me. Anyway, today's lesson will be a race. There will be 4 5-member races. All Might said, but he was secretly a little annoyed. Oh man, I didn't know Melissa could do stuff like that. The first person to get in touch with me after I send out the distress signal wins. I'll be somewhere on the training ground, Gamma. It seems easy enough, doesn't it? All Might inquired as the pupils enthusiastically nodded. Before entering the training field, the symbol of peace said, Very well, let's begin with Shiro, Midoriya, Ojiro, Iida, and Ashido. Izuku turned as the first 5 waited for All Might to send the signal, and he saw Mina's eyes on him, probably checking his suit. Well, it makes me think of All Might's Bronze Age outfit. As the distress signal went off, Ashido gave Izuku the thumbs up and said, Mina approves. The 5 took off right away, with Iida and Shiro leading the way just before a flash of green lightning blasted past them. Wow, take a look at Midoriya. Izuku leapt almost halfway into the training field in a single bound, landing on a walkway of pipes before effortlessly running across them and bouncing all over the training field with total control, Kirishima remarked. As he leapt between the walls to reach his goal, Izuku thought, This is perfect. I can't believe it feels so light, it's like it's not even there. Thank you, Melissa, he thought. Kaminari, barely able to keep up with Izuku as he went from one screen to the next, said, Oh man, he's even faster than before and he's not even using his snake cowl thing. Bakugo stood next to him, gritting his teeth. As Katsuki watched Izuku sail through the air and land at All Might's location far ahead of his classmates, he thought to himself, while I wasted my time with that asshole best jeanist Izuku jumped ahead of me again, and he wasn't even doing hero work. All Might turned to Izuku, realizing they had a few moments before Zero arrived. As Zero arrived somewhat discouraged, All Might gave Izuku a thumbs up and said, "You've really made amazing progress, young Midoriya. I'm glad to see Melissa was able to help you become your best self at this point in time." "Oh my god, I thought this was my moment to shine, Todoroki, and now you, Midoriya. Am I merely here as a prop for someone to flaunt?" As Iida arrived, he inquired. "Zero, you should feel proud of yourself because you took second place." As Ojiro and Mina finally showed up, Iida said, adjusting his glasses. Ojiro said, "Well, it appears that we're bringing up the rear this time around." Mina shrugged and grinned. As All Might draped the winner belt around Midoriya, she remarked, "Can't win them all." Before letting the students leave the training ground to make room for the next group, the symbol of peace said, "Good job to you all. I'm amazed at the progress each of you has made." Melissa had really gone all out with his suit, and Izuku looked at it, saying that it would be his first time wearing it and that it felt like a second skin. Grinning, he said, "I need to give Melissa a call and let her know how wonderful the suit feels." "Don't think you've won, Izuku. You may have gotten in a little training, but that's not going to help you catch up to me." Katsuki appeared in front of them, his eyes on Izuku's, as he and his classmates headed to the cafeteria after class. Izuku walked beside Ojiro and Kirishima, the three of them trying to think of a good time to meet up for training. Izuku smiled as Katsuki yelled, "You seem a little concerned that Katsuki didn't receive much attention while you were an intern." Izuku said, it was new to the blonde to needle Katsuki a little. "You have no chance of defeating me because I trained under one of the top 10 heroes while you were playing in a lab." Kirishima glanced at Izuku and laughed. Katsuki shot back as he turned to leave. Izuku shrugged and the redhead remarked, "You two really get along." As they sat down at the table, he replied, "Better than we used to anyway." "So, Izuku, are you worried about the possible content of the final exams?" Izuku scratched his cheek while Ojiro ate his bowl of rice and asked. "I'm more nervous about the exam's physical component. We have no idea what they will test us on." The green-haired hero ran through a number of scenarios while he sliced off a piece of katsudon and slowly ate it. Iida sat down beside Izuku and said, "Yeah, that is problematic. All we can do is prepare as best we can." The taller boy said, but then they heard a feminine voice. "I wouldn't be overly concerned. I apologize for overhearing what you guys were discussing, but I heard from an upperclassman that the final exams are always robot fights like the entrance exams." The girl in question had teal eyes and long ginger hair. Before Monoma showed up at her shoulder, she introduced herself, saying, "My name is Itsuka Kendo from Class 1B. "What are you doing, Kendo?" "That was our hard-won edge over Class A before he was struck over the head and rendered unconscious," he yelled in the girl's ear. As she left, Kendo waved and said, "Don't worry about him, he's just a himself." "Well, I'm really relieved about that. I don't have to worry about holding back if we're fighting against robots," Denki said, snapping the electricity off his fingers and forming a tiny line of electricity between them. Izuku smiled calmly, but he was secretly a little disappointed because he had really wanted a test to demonstrate his abilities. "Tell me about it, that was my biggest concern too," Mina said, smiling with relief as she bumped her fist against Kaminari. He thought, "Oh well, I guess this test will be easy after all." The teachers got together after school that day to talk about the impending final exams. As you are aware, given the rise in villains in recent years, we must make our final exams more challenging in order to better instruct our students. In light of this, I let Aizawa choose which students would be paired with which teachers. As Aizawa got to her feet, Principal Nezu said, "Aizawa, if you would." "All right, I've considered each pairing carefully, taking into account their personalities, skill levels, and general cooperativeness. Momo Yaoyorozu and Shoto Todoroki will be the first team." Before going on with his list, Aizawa stated, "The next team will be Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo. Their over-reliance on their quirks needs to be addressed if they're to grow, so I'll be their opponent and will erase their quirks. They're the class's two mainstays, in my opinion, and their rivalry will make it difficult for them to collaborate." With Toshi nodding, Aizawa stated, "All Might, it will be your responsibility to fix this." "I understand, Aizawa." "Good, the next teams will be Mina and Denki against you, Principal Nezu. Those two don't take things seriously enough and frequently downplay how serious things are because of how destructive their quirks are. You should demonstrate to them that first impressions aren't always accurate. Yuga will be faced by 13, and Ochako's black hole will pose a special challenge to both of their peculiarities. Since you all use sound, I assume you'd be the best person to deal with Koji and Kyoka, so Mike will be against them. Dealing with your quirk will force Tsuyu and Fumikage to think creatively because they are both well-rounded students. The aggressive characters Midnight vs Honta and Minoru, Snipe vs Mezzo, Toru, Cementos vs Rakido, and Eijiro need to learn that sometimes the best course of action is to retreat. Aizawa glanced up at his fellow educators and said, Power Loader will finally be in charge of Tenya and Mashiro. Do you have any questions? The educators gave a headshake. Principal Nezu slapped his paw on the table and said, All right, then let the final exams start. For the third time since leaving the house, Izuku most likely checked his bag. He was currently en route to Momo's house when the girl asked him to assist her in organizing a study session for Kaminari, Mina, Mashiro, Kyoka, and Shiro. As the class representative, it was his responsibility to make sure that his classmates received all the assistance he could, so even though he felt bad about missing out on studying with Iida and Ochako, he couldn't turn down Momo, the top student in the class, if she asked for assistance. It was the girl herself who opened the door to Momo's house when Izuku knocked. As she opened the door and fully displayed her casual attire, she said, Oh Izuku, glad you could make it. She wore capri pants and a white shirt with short sleeves. As Izuku passed her and smelled her perfume, she said, Come on in. It made him think of peaches, which made him happy instead. Momo tilted her head to the side in response to his remark, You really take after your namesake. The rich girl blushed and fanned her face as he explained, You smell like peaches. As she looked at the ground and blushed, she put some hair behind her ear and said, Well, you see, I wasn't sure what to wear. I didn't want to wear something too noticeable after all, it's not just the two of us. Is it too much? She inquired, looking up shyly at Izuku, who stroked her head with a smile. She mimicked his smile as they walked toward the dining room, where Momo had set up a makeshift classroom. Not at all, I love it, he said. As Momo inhaled deeply, he turned to face her and said, Quite the setup you have here, Momo, so what can I do to help? Izuku nodded, and she added, Well, you seem to be pretty good at English, so I thought you could help everyone in that. He pulled out his English textbook and said, That works. My dad works overseas, and taught me a little English while I was growing up, so it's pretty natural for me now. As Izuku considered that, she moved closer to him and said, While we wait, is there anything you need tutoring with? I know you had study plans with Ochako and Iida, and I'm sorry for forcing you to come here. The least I could do is helping you with what you needed to study. He pulled out his geometry textbook and said, Don't worry about it, Momo. I'm the class representative, so it's my responsibility to see my classmates succeed. However, if you're certain, I could use some help with geometry. Momo eagerly sat down beside Izuku, with just an inch separating them, and the two jumped right into geometry. Wonderful, let's get started then, Momo said. Izuku couldn't help but notice Momo's closeness, and the smell of the peaches, the heat radiating off her, and the feel of her breath as she leaned in to explain something distracted him a little. There was a knock on the door just as he was about to lose it. On his way to the door, he jerked to his feet and exclaimed, It's probably everyone else, I'll go get it while you set up. Momo scowled behind his back instead. So near. As she watched Izuku turn the corner to retrieve the door, she pondered. When Izuku opened the door, the other members of the study group were already there. When Shiro and Denki saw their class representative there, their eyes widened. Denki grabbed Midoriya's collar as Shiro said, What the, Midoriya, what are you doing here? I didn't know you were studying with Yaoyorozu too. Before Jiro stabbed him with her earphone jack vibrating his entire body, Denki yelled, Or maybe you're here for another reason, something more illicit maybe? A tawdry affair between class rep and his subordinate? Midoriya, you swine? Jiro winked at Izuku as they all filed in, saying, Don't be stupid. Obviously Yaomomo needed help with tutoring all of us, so she called in Midoriya. Izuku followed everyone inside and let out a slow sigh of relief. Izuku took Mashiro and Shiro to help with their English, and Momo took on Denki, Mina, and Kyoka. The study session started off fairly well. Sitting side by side, Momo and Izuku reviewed the work of their respective tutees. Izuku saw Momo playing with his leg, dragging a finger up and down his thigh. At first, he thought it was cute and didn't mind, but Momo gradually gained confidence, moving from stroking his thigh to gripping it and sliding closer to his groin. Ignoring or brushing it off was becoming more and more difficult. He let out a loud gasp when Momo reached for his cock and stroked it through his trousers. Ojiro raised an eyebrow in Izuku's direction. Izuku nodded when Ojiro asked, You all right, Izuku? Yeah, just really impressed with Yaoyorozu's home. He nodded enthusiastically, still flushed. Shiro definitely believed it, but Mashirao didn't. Tell me about it, I've only seen homes like this in movies. Shiro nodded. Izuku was grateful that Shiro co-signed his lie, but he had more important things to focus on and didn't have time to feel bad about it. With a flourish, Momo unzipped his pants, slid her thin hand inside them like a viper into a crib, and seized her prize, handling his dick with the assurance of a puppeteer. Izuku bit his lip to contain a groan as he turned to face her. He was shocked to see that she was behaving perfectly normally, as though she wasn't playing him like a toy while making minor corrections to Denki's paper. Ojiro handed his paper to Izuku, who examined it while attempting to ignore Momo's expert handwriting. So Midoriya, is this the way you're supposed to write this? Ojiro asked. Izuku moaned softly as Momo rubbed the very tip of his dick, smearing his pre across the head of his cock. Oh no, you chose the wrong write. Instead of writing, write this way, you wrote. Yo Midoriya, you're really red, are you okay? Shiro asked, observing Midoriya's bright red face and labored breathing while he listened to see if he had perhaps answered the question correctly. He sat up a little straighter and said, no, I'm fine. Momo gave in for the moment so he could gather his thoughts. Izuku wrote both words out to show Ojiro, who nodded, yeah, I'm fine, as I was saying. Instead of write, you used write as in a ritual. Ojiro corrected his response and made a note of it, saying, oh, I got it, thanks. Izuku sensed Momo's motion ramping up to another orgasm at this precise moment, but she stopped short as before, keeping him on edge and never letting him fully compose himself, but also not pushing him to the point where he would climax. Izuku was a ball of sexual annoyance by the end of the study session. Even a little wind could make him climax at this point. As Momo escorted them out, saying she would take care of Izuku, Shiro remarked, man, I feel bad for Midoriya, tutoring us must have really taken it out of him. The boys were persuaded to accompany them by the other girls' assurances. Mina looked at Momo and shook her head as they walked away. As she walked away, she laughed and shook her head, saying, what a naughty rich girl you are. As she returned to the dining room, Momo laughed as well. Izuku was catching his breath before turning to face her, and the look he gave her almost made her knees give out. He yelled in frustration, that was reckless, Momo. What would have happened if we got caught? Seeing the flush on her face as she put a hand to her mouth, he said, that was a bad idea. I can't believe you did that? He asked, Momo? As she gave him a look. She huffed lightly and said, go on, tell me how bad of a girl I am. Izuku now knew that beneath Yaoyorozu's perfect girl exterior was the face of a mild masochist. With a twinge in his overworked and unrewarded cock, Izuku swallowed. He might have reconsidered this at a different time, but now his dick was in charge and he was powerless to stop it. Izuku got up and moved in her direction. As she stared at Izuku, Momo jumped and her legs trembled. You empty-headed rich girl, did you think I wouldn't get you back for that stunt you pulled? He thundered. I'm sorry, I didn't, Maya. He pushed her to her knees and said, you shut your mouth when I'm talking, in fact why don't you put it to some use? Momo let out a little yelp as she was made to look down Izuku's dick and felt the force of his hold on her shoulders. Before ripping open her shirt and removing her bra, he said, yeah, that's better. This allowed her breasts to freely sway and jiggle. As Momo licked at his tip, he whispered, now wrap those around my dick, you cow. She did just that, squeezing his dick between her breasts and sliding them up and down his length. She was certain that there would be a puddle on the floor because her pussy was so wet right now. Izuku shoved in between Momo's heavy tits while holding her by the ponytail. As he pushed harder, forcing Momo down on his cock until he buried his dick in her mouth and coming hard, the sensation of Momo's breasts around his dick was like heaven. Momo pulled off Izuku's cock as it splashed his cream all over her face and breasts, causing her to cough after the first shot coated the back of her throat. Momo was rocked by her orgasm and soaked through her clothes as she lay on the floor, her body twitching. Izuku instantly felt horrible and fell to his knees. Momo put her hand to his lips and grinned, saying, oh Momo, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean. As she sat up and ran her hand through Izuku's mess, putting a finger in her mouth to taste it, she said, that was most glorious, Izuku. We really should do this more often. All Izuku could do was look at her and wonder how she was able to conceal this aspect of herself so well. As the final exam days drew near, Izuku and his classmates gave it their all, anticipating the practical, which they believed to be the easiest section of the test. Most of UA's teachers were waiting for them when Izuku led his class to the training field, where they were all decked out in their hero suits. Izuku rubbed his chin and Ochako asked, Deku, what do you think all the teachers are here for? Before Principal Nezu took the stage, he suggested, well, Perhaps they'll be evaluating us similarly to how they did in the entrance exams. As you may have discovered or inferred, the practical exam is typically administered using robotic villains, just like the entrance exams. Nezu's statement, "That is not the case here," shocked the students, but not more than Denki and Mina, who had thought they were safe as long as they passed the practical and knew they could attack fictitious villains. With the rise in villain activity, we thought it prudent to step up the intensity of our final exams as well. Instead of mechanical adversaries, you will be broken into pairs to face one of the teachers you see here. Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki were the only students whose jaws did not drop. Kaminari looked at his classmates, who were all showing differing degrees of agreement. "Sir, isn't this a bit much? You can't honestly expect us to succeed here. I mean, you are all pros, we don't stand a chance," he said. Aizawa bluntly put an end to any more objections by saying, "We do expect you to overcome this, and you either will or you won't. Don't give up just yet, students. You haven't heard the parameters of the test yet. They are exceedingly simple. All you need to do to pass the test is A. Clamp these handcuffs on your opponent in any way you can, or B. Exit the training ground through the designated area. You will have 30 minutes to accomplish either. You see, sometimes fighting a villain head-on isn't the best course. At times you need to consider getting reinforcements or retreating. The choice will be you and your partners whether to stand and fight or run and get help," Nezu concluded. "And have no fear, children. To make things a little fairer, each of us will be wearing these ultra-compressed weights that will equal a quarter of our body weight, so it will be possible to overcome us, but that doesn't mean you should completely ignore the possibility of escape," All Might said as Aizawa came forward. "I decided who would be partnering with whom, and which teacher you would be facing, so first up will be Kirishima and Sato vs Cementos. The rest of you are free to either strategize with your partner or watch the battles in the monitoring room. As such, the teams are as follows. Tokiyami and Asui vs Ectoplasm, Iida and Ojiro vs Powerloader, Todoroki and Yaoyorozu vs myself, Uraraka and Aoyama vs 13, Ashido and Kaminari vs Nezu, Jiro and Koda vs Present Mike, Hagakuri and Shoji vs Snipe, Mineta and Zero vs Midnight, and finally Bakugo and Midoriya vs All Might. Any of you who don't pass will not be able to go to the summer camp over the break and will be forced to take remedial classes." The shortest student in the class looked at Zero and let out a shout of delight at this announcement. "We have but one mission, Zero: to strip Midnight of every inch of clothing," Mineta said. As Izuku and Katsuki exchanged glances, Zero said, "You're such a scumbag, you know that." He was following his partner. As Izuku grinned, Katsuki snarled, "Just stay out of my way, Izuku. I don't want you to ruin my victory over All Might." The two boys exchanged a confident smile before Katsuki turned away and Izuku headed to the monitoring room, where he discovered Ochako and Recovery Girl. "Get in your way. Just try to keep up, Katsuki. By the time you get there I'll have already won." Knowing how that would go with the explosive blonde, she said, "Deku, I thought you'd be here soon. Strategizing with Bakugo didn't work out." Izuku gave a nod. He said, eager to demonstrate to his mentor how much he had learned during his internship, "Yeah, I didn't even ask. Looks like it'll be a race to see who can pass the test first." As the match began, she laughed and remarked, "Well, the same thing happened with me and Aoyama. I think he's better off strategizing with his cape than me." Izuku rubbed his chin and watched as Kirishima and Sato stormed in, smashing through the concrete barricades of Cementos. "So do you think Kirishima and Sato are going to pass?" she asked. Izuku shook his head and sighed. As the Recovery Girl nodded, he remarked, "Not with this strategy, they're not. Cementos's quirk is nearly inexhaustible, so going at him head-on was not the best choice." As if to support her claim, Sato and Kirishima were engulfed in cement, leaving only their heads protruding from the ground. "Correct, young Midoriya. Those two were both literally and figuratively banging their heads against a wall." As Tokiyami and Sue took center stage in the upcoming match, Ochako said, feeling sorry for the two boys, "Dang, that sucks." She looked at Izuku and said, "I'm sure Sue and Tokiyami can take this, right?" with a hint of concern for her friend. As they watched, the match ended with Sue and Tokiyami using a very cunning tag team move to capture Ectoplasm. Izuku said, "Well, the two are suited for each other. Dark Shadow being a close to mid-range quirk and Sue being great at every distance. The only problem I can see is getting to the real Ectoplasm." Sue turned to face a camera and flushed. "I'm hoping Izuku didn't witness me doing something so obscene." As she and Tokiyami walked off the field, she pondered. Iida and Ojiro were the following team. Gazing at the screen, Izuku said, "Come on, Ojiro and Iida. Ojiro had been putting in a lot of effort in their sparring sessions, and Izuku hoped he would use his knowledge of Iida's desire to prove himself following the events with Stain. As Iida and Ojiro launched another team attack, with Ojiro being flung outside the battlegrounds, he said simply, "They'll win this." "Yes," Izuku exclaimed joyfully, and Ochako grinned softly as he watched Izuku grow ecstatic over his friend's triumph. "How could I ever imagine that he wouldn't have space in his heart for me? He cares so much." As Momo and Todoroki appeared on screen, she asked herself. As the recovery girl confirmed, Izuku remarked, "This is going to be tough for those two, and I can see why Mr. Aizawa pitted them against himself." As Aizawa captured Todoroki, leaving only Momo, recovery girl said, "Each of these matches has forced you students to confront a glaring weakness, such as Sato and Kirishima's endurance limits, but the real test is how you overcome this." Momo was running as fast as she could in an attempt to come up with a plan. "I can't think of anything, so this isn't good. The sports festival is exactly like this." She paused to think. She halted her run and made her way back to Todoroki, saying to herself, "Just like the sports festival, I couldn't think and lost. I would have lost Izuku there, and then if Mina hadn't won. No, I can't let that happen again. I won't lose. No matter what, she would ensure that the two of them passed so that this wouldn't turn out the same as the sports festival." Izuku looked at Momo with a proud smile as she and Todoroki achieved a rather clever victory over Aizawa, saying, "She stopped panicking and is thinking clearly now." As they faced 13, Ochako said, "Well, it looks like it's my turn now. I won't let Momo show me up," as he left the monitoring room to meet Aoyama. Izuku observed Ochako voluntarily relinquish the bar she had been clinging to in order to prevent 13 from snatching her away. He claimed to have felt his heart sink when 13 closed her black hole at the last second, only to have Ochako pin her and put her in handcuffs. Izuku exclaimed, "Way to go, Uraraka," as Iida, who had just joined him, grinned and gave him a shoulder pat. Izuku blushed in gratitude that Tenya handled his enthusiasm in such a professional manner, and Iida remarked, "Seeing our class rep so invested in his fellow classmates makes me proud to be in Class 1A. Mina and Kaminari came next, and Izuku was disappointed but not shocked by their defeat. Because the principal appeared to be a helpless person, Mina and Kaminari weren't treating the situation with the seriousness they should have. As the next match started, Izuku nodded and remarked, "They say knowledge is power for a reason." Though Recovery Girl was extremely disappointed in Present Mike's performance, Koda and Kyoka managed to defeat the speaker hero after an extremely slow start in which Jiro and Koda were pinned down by Present Mike's far-reaching voice. Izuku couldn't suppress a small smile. It appeared that even the teachers were being evaluated. Izuku thought the next match would be a bit of a toss-up. Snipe was exceptionally talented and, in contrast to both students, could easily defeat them from a distance. Izuku said, "Those two might be in trouble." However, Snipe helped bring about his own demise by hurling a smoke grenade and getting sidetracked by Shoji, which allowed Toru to approach and handcuff him without causing the professional any embarrassment. Although Izuku was unable to pinpoint the specifics, Snipe appeared to be in a bit of a bind based on his actions. Admittedly, Izuku did not think this pairing would work out. In order to pass, Shiro might have to do both of their parts, but surprisingly, Mineta won for both of them. As the girls in the class shook their heads, Izuku nodded proudly and remarked, "Wow, I guess even Mineta has his moments of true heroism. Twice a day, even a broken clock is right," was the girls' unspoken agreement in class, but Izuku knew it was finally his turn after that match ended. Katsuki was waiting for him when he left the monitoring room and headed for the training field. As he stood beside his opponent, Izuku activated his full armor. They both stared at the door until it opened, letting them in. As the two stepped forward into the sight of their upcoming match, Izuku's faceplate slid into place with a metallic clink. Katsuki and Izuku entered the training area. They had entered on the main street and could see the exit gate at the other end, but All Might was directly in front of it. It was another cityscape. With his fists on his hips and a broad smile on his face, his blue eyes gleaming, he stood with pride. "Come heroes and don't hold back." All Might slammed his fist forward to emphasize his point, sending a blast of wind hurtling down the street and smashing the windows as it reached the two heroes in training. Bakugo braced himself by driving his foot forward in anticipation of the impending attack. He then turned to face Izuku and saw as the latter cocked his fist back before driving it forward to collide with All Might's wind. The two pressures collided and shot upward, punching a hole in a passing cloud. With an unflinching smile, All Might got to his feet. His training clearly paid off because he can already counter with air pressure. All Might pondered before choosing to confront the two. All Might hurled himself at Katsuki and Izuku. Katsuki gritted his teeth and glanced at Midoriya. Katsuki yelled, "You're not going to show me up, Izuku." As he blasted All Might into the air, Izuku leapt into action, running down the main street to meet All Might while summoning his full cowl, which was green lighting arcing around his body. Green lighting arced around the two as All Might sailed upward to meet Katsuki, who responded with an explosion. All Might was ready for this and launched another air pressure punch, forcing Katsuki's explosion back into his face and driving All Might towards the ground so that he could deliver a kick to Izuku, who sidestepped the blow by backflipping away. All Might then slammed into the pavement, sending out deep cracks that traveled across the street and up some of the buildings. When Izuku attempted a roundhouse kick, the hero easily averted the intended blow. Izuku instantly dropped to his feet and rushed forward to deliver a full power punch, but as the blow landed, he noticed that All Might had his fist in his hand. After spinning with Izuku just in time to slam him into Katsuki, All Might yelled, "You'll have to do better than that, hero," and threw Izuku in the opposite direction, watching him crash into a wall. Katsuki was thrown away, tumbling down the street. Izuku coughed violently as the blow forced the wind out of his lungs. Izuku opened his eyes and saw a section of railing aimed at him. "I can't even land a blow. All Might really is amazing," he thought to himself. His eyes bucked as he attempted to dodge, but he was trapped there by the railing's ripped sections embedded in the wall. All Might turned and reached out to grab Bakugo's face, saying, "Now then, that should hold you for a moment." To the pro's surprise, Bakugo then let loose a flurry of explosions. Having your face grabbed would make most people shudder, but not you, young Bakugo. Even so, your unwavering resolve is admirable. Before punching the boy, All Might let Bakugo float in midair for a brief moment. Izuku watched everything unfold in slow motion from his perch pressed against the wall. "Get moving," he yelled to himself, grabbed the railing, and pulled, feeling the metal twist and bend before breaking apart, enabling Izuku to move with lightning speed. He arced down the street, leapt above All Might, and slammed his foot down on the pro's arm, sending him to the ground. He then spun and caught All Might with a kick to the chest, using the pro to launch himself away while grabbing hold of Bakugo as they gained some distance. All Might rubbed his chest and coughed. "Young Midoriya, that was a pretty good hit." As he stood up, All Might thought to himself, catching some of his lost breath. Izuku dropped Katsuki to the ground after landing with him. The blonde leapt to her feet and scowled at Izuku. Bakugo yelled, "What the fuck did you do that for, you bastard? I didn't ask for your help," as Izuku turned to face him. Katsuki's eyes bucked at the arrogant nonsense Izuku had said to him. "I know the only reason I did that was because I didn't want you to pass out and not see me win this." Izuku stared at Katsuki intently for a moment before he said, "The hell you will, I'm going to be the one to surpass All Might here and now, not you, you fucking ninja nerd." Just before the lightning surrounding his body turned red and started to fly away, he said, "Prove it then." Izuku's wrist lights turned from green to red, before the armor around Izuku's arms and legs disengaged and the wrapping around his arms started to bind around his hands, forcing his fists. The suit said, "Secondary form activated." The same transformation occurred on his feet, strengthening the armor there as well. Before launching himself at All Might, Izuku said, "Full armor snake cowl." The hero was unable to keep up with Izuku's speed and ducked to the side of his punch, his arm and fist flying past. "Young Midoriya is too direct," All Might mused to himself. He had observed Izuku's fighting techniques and knew that the boy was a cunning fighter who always planned ahead, so a direct blow like that was out of the ordinary but easily avoided. All Might guessed, then was thrown to the right into Izuku's extended arm with a fist to the left of his face, clothes lining the hero and sending him sailing into a nearby building. Izuku turned to the spot where All Might landed, and his arm retracted. "That's my new technique thanks to my training. Python ambush smash, no matter where you go it'll catch you." The Class 1A students watched in amazement at what they saw from the monitoring room. As he watched, Sato swallowed and asked, "Is this even real? How can they be this strong?" The class saw Izuku's fist stretch past All Might, missing completely, then bending to the right and gaining speed before bending back towards Izuku and All Might and then turning again to slam into the hero's face. In addition to Izuku, Bakugo had also been severely beaten, but he returned for more almost immediately, which was crazy. Feeling so inadequate, Aoyama remarked, "Even my twinkling can't stand next to their aurora." Todoroki grinned as he faced off against the top hero, clenching his fist while glancing at Midoriya. Shoto clenched his fist and said, "I have to get stronger." Bakugo gazed at Izuku, who appeared to be so far ahead at the moment. Bakugo shook his head, clenched his fist, and slammed it into his face. As All Might emerged from the hole he had made in the building and wiped his cheek, he yelled, "No, I won't lose to this nerd, not now, not ever," and rushed forward. All Might said, "I see you've made a lot of progress, Midoriya, but will it be enough, I wonder?" Then, he appeared directly in front of Izuku and struck him in the stomach, or so he believed, when he noticed that Midoriya's arms had been raised to block the blow. As he was about to deliver a second blow, Bakugo grabbed Midoriya's shoulder and pulled him aside, allowing him to punch All Might in the face. Bakugo yelled, "Get out of my way, you fucking nerd," as his explosion went off, sending All Might sliding back before he cleared the smoke in time to avoid another punch from Izuku. Recalling the last time, he avoided the next blow, which came from above and slammed into the ground as All Might turned and stepped back, avoiding an explosion from Bakugo, and attempted a back fist, only to have it offset by Izuku's. All Might grinned. It's difficult to predict who will make what move because they aren't really cooperating. Rather, this is a competition between them to see who can defeat me first. Since Izuku was aware that Katsuki would never cooperate with him, he encouraged Bakugo to compete with him. From that point on, it was up to Bakugo's instincts to know when and where to exploit any opening All Might provided in Izuku's methodical mind to avoid hitting Bakugo. The shockwave blew away the smoke as he pulled Izuku forward and drove his fist into the boy's stomach, sending him flying back. However, as Izuku flew back, Katsuki grabbed hold of him and spun, launching him back at All Might with explosive force. All Might danced after Katsuki's next explosion before countering Izuku's next ambush punch. All Might's eyes widened at the enormous wall of explosion approaching him, and Izuku threw back his hands before bringing them forward and having them cross over one another like a DNA helix to slam into his crossed arms. This forced the hero back, and then he threw his arms wide, knocking Izuku off as the boy flew from his view. I understand that Izuku was merely Bakugo's diversion, but that line of reasoning is overly simplistic. As he clenched his fist and slammed it forward, All Might thought. All Might exclaimed, "Texas Smash!" as he swung his wind pressure forward, slicing a hole through Bakugo's explosion and tearing it apart. He then heard a click and turned to see Midoriya at his side, panting heavily as steam escaped from his armor. "You're under arrest, All Might," Izuku gasped as he leaned on the hero, and All Might grinned before bursting into laughter. As Katsuki approached, the hero chuckled and said, "Well done, young Bakugo and Midoriya, your teamwork was exceptional." "Don't get arrogant, Izuku. I was the only one who could accomplish that, so it's my win." Izuku grinned as he turned to face Katsuki. Bakugo stepped back, not expecting Izuku to say, "Thanks for the help, Katsuki, I couldn't have done it without you." Izuku grinned. Katsuki said, "Yeah, well, remember that," as he passed Izuku. All Might gave Izuku a back pat. Izuku grinned as he watched Katsuki leave, saying, "Good work, young Midoriya. I'm proud of you. Not only have you made this power your own, but also have found a way forward with your friend." Before departing as well, he returned the hero's smile and said, "It's all thanks to you, All Might." The final exam results were revealed by Aizawa a few days later. Before announcing the names of those who failed, Aizawa said, "I'll just tell you who failed, the list is shorter infer from that who passed." As Mineta smiled virtuously, Shiro flopped forward onto his desk in disappointment. Mina Ishido, Denki Kaminari, Rikido Sato, Eijiro Kirishima, and last Honta Shiro. "Shiro, you must spend the entire test lying on Midnight's lap because this is karmic justice. Turn from your sins." Mineta pondered in his mind. It was now announced that those who failed the final exams would not be allowed to go to the training camp. Aizawa said, "That was a necessary deception to push you to your breaking point," while Iida slapped his hands on his desk. "You are constantly undermining my belief in Hero Society, Mr. Aizawa. I'm getting close to losing it." Iida emphasized each sentence with a chop of air. Aizawa went on, disregarding Iida's tirade and the applause of those who didn't succeed. Aizawa abruptly cut short his class's celebration when he said, "But make no mistake, failure is still failure and there are consequences to it. Those of you who failed will be put through remedial classes as well as training during the summer camp, so much so you'll wish you were dead. Now that that's been said, let's begin class." Class 1A was packing up to leave at the end of the school day when the girls started talking to each other. Momo asked, unsure of what equipment to bring and what kind of clothes to pack, "I wonder where the training camp will take place. I'd like to pack accordingly." You have a point. The teachers are being really hush about it, which leaves us in the dark as well," replied Suyu. Toru clapped her hands and grinned. The other girls agreed with Toru's suggestion, then why not go shopping to fill in some of the gaps? Well, I do have the time, what with UA's condition that we are not to leave on any trips. My schedule, which included my family's trip to Italy, has suddenly opened up. Momo sighed. She had also planned to invite Izuku along on her trip. A girl could only dream of spending an entire summer with her beloved. This statement left Ochako speechless. What is your life? She exclaimed, swooning over her classmates' wealth. As more students in the class started to inquire about the trip, Kirishima remarked, "Did I hear something about a training camp shopping spree? I could use some more weights." Mineta rubbed his hands together and remarked, "I could use some night vision goggles for extracurricular activities." Iida answered, "And I'll need proper footwear for the outdoors." Clamping around Izuku's arm and pressing it between her breasts, Toru said, "Well, it's settled. Then how about all of Class 1A go on a shopping trip together? What do you think, Class Rep?" The boy blushed. As Katsuki's exit door opened, he acknowledged, Sure sounds like a good idea." He yelled, "Count me the hell out," and slammed the door. Toru was relieved that no one could see her sticking out her tongue, saying, "Well, nobody asked him anyway." Izuku turned to the other members of Class 1A and took his position as class representative. Before everyone accepted the suggestion and bid farewell for the day, he said, "So how about this Saturday we meet up at the mall to go shopping?" The rest of his class followed Izuku into the mall, where they all searched for something interesting. Everyone agreed and went off to find what they needed. When he said, "All right, since everybody has different things they need, how about we break into teams and meet back in like 2 hours?" Izuku noticed that nobody was there when he looked around. He asked, considering what he might need for the training camp, what should I do?" As he turned to head to the sports store, he ran into a man wearing a hoodie. "I guess I could use some new shoes and maybe wrist and ankle weights." "Yeah, that's a good idea." "Oh, excuse me, see. I take it you're from the sports festival?" It was Tamura Shigaraki who said, "Don't make a scene. I just really wanted to have a chat, maybe get an autograph. You disgusting heroes are all about showing off to your fans, right?" The man asked, cutting him off and slinging an arm around his neck, pressing his fingers to the back of his neck. "I'm a big fan." Izuku's mind was racing with ideas of how he could escape this situation, and he knew that Shigaraki's quirk could rot his throat in a matter of seconds before he could even summon his full cowl. He asked, glaring at Izuku with a chapped smile. Shigaraki was even more enraged by Izuku's broad smile, which was reminiscent of All Might, when he said, "Sure, I don't mind." Shigaraki detested this child. Tamura whispered, "Come on then, let's have a seat." Ochako was listening to Mina's conversation as she and the other girls entered a clothes store. "So what gets guys going?" Before responding to her own question, Mina said, "I'm pretty sure Midori is by himself, so all we have to do is get him over here and have him choose some panties for us and boom, we've got him." Seeing girls wearing clothes, they picked out especially panties. Mina whispered, causing several blushes. "However, how can we bring him here?" As Mina shook her finger, Jiro remarked, "Izuku isn't going to just stroll into a girl's clothes store by himself." She pointed to Ochako and remarked, "Of course not, which is why we have to throw him some bait." "Why me? What am I?" She asked because she wasn't sure why Mina would choose her, not because she didn't like the idea. "You're cute and innocent, that's all." Mina poked Ochako's cheek and said, "Just flash him that adorable smile and that cute blush and he'll go anywhere with you." Momo snorted at such a crude nickname, but Mina added, "Unlike me, Sue, or our resident rich masochist over here, Izuku wouldn't suspect you of setting him up." She then pushed Ochako out of the store, saying, "Now lure that beast here. Now, where are the thongs?" Mina asked, waving her away before turning to face her fellow countrymen. The other girls shuddered and wished they were with Ochako as she said this with a cunning smile. He was sitting at the fountain with a man in a hoodie who had his arm wrapped around Izuku in a rather possessive manner. Ochako pouted for a moment before grinning, happy that she could be the one to get Deku, even if it was for a trap like this. "Deku?" She drew their attention with her question. "This is fucking ridiculous," Tamura Shigaraki said as he sat in the mahjong bar and watched the TV in the corner. Something about Stain and his capture was on every channel, and they also claimed that his Nomu were a part of Stain's scheme to terrorize the city of Hosu. Kurogiri sighed, knowing that he would have to be the one to clean that up and purchase a replacement after shouted Tamura through the remote and watched it break against the wall. Before Tamura rounded on him, Kurogiri said, "Tamura, you need to calm down." "Kurogiri, you don't realize that those were my Nomu. That was my plan. Now, everyone believes that Stain is in charge of the League of Villains. I will not tolerate that." Before the bar door opened and the underworld broker Jiren entered, Tamura hissed and scratched his neck violently. Jiren said, knock, knock, I come bearing gifts." Then he moved aside to reveal a young man and a girl. The girl had glowing golden eyes and light blonde hair pulled up in two buns on either side of her head, and she was wearing a big sweater that almost covered her navy skirt. The boy was tall, had black hair, and had blue eyes. His body was a patchwork of burn scars, and he was dressed in jeans, a white t-shirt underneath a long-sleeved black shirt with a high collar and plain shoes. These are your most recent hires. They wanted to join the league after being impacted by the hero killer. As the girl bounded forward with a big smile on her face, Jiren said, "Well, go ahead and introduce yourselves." She practically vibrated with excitement as she said, "My name is Himiko Toga, and it's nice to meet you, Mr. Handyman. I would like to meet Mr. Staney and join your league. Hurry up and let me join, please." "I go by Dobby, and are you really following the will of Stain?" the boy asked calmly, almost languidly, in sharp contrast to his countryman. Dobby inquired, and Tamura glanced at both before focusing on Dobby. What was that? At least the psycho could give a proper introduction. What is Patchwork's real name? As Dobby rubbed the back of his head, Tamura snarled. Dobby's response, "I'll tell you that when you've earned my trust." Tamura was already upset, and having these two jerks show up in his bar and start babbling about Stain didn't make it any better. Tamura yelled, "Tell me now." Dobby stood up and just stared at him, not even bothering to answer. Tamura snarled, "That's it, you two are done. You are not the kind of person I need in my league," he growled. "It's whatever to me, as long as you pay my finder's fee." The broker stated his priority, and Jiren shrugged while lighting a cigarette. Since communications had broken down quickly, Kurogiri stepped in and said, "Tamura, please, we could use these two. Just think about the future of the league for a moment." Tamura pulled his hands away from Kurogiri's warp as he lunged forward, followed by Dobby and Toga, each of whom had their attack warped to a different part of the room. "You two had better leave when I return because I'm over this." Reaching for his hoodie by the door, he yelled, then walked through it and slammed it behind him. "Wow, that was terrifying. I felt like I was going to die." Tamura gave a joyful squeal. "You realize that you're crazy, don't you? He's all show. There's no way someone like him was acknowledged by Stain," Dobby told the girl. Jiren, who had just extinguished his cigarette, turned to face Kurogiri. "Do you think he ought to be in charge of this group?" With Kurogiri staring at him, Jiren remarked, "He seems a little immature for something like that." "It is our master's will, and Tamura's departure shows how far he has come." Kurogiri told Jiren, "He may not like it, but Tamura knows what he must do." Jiren shrugged. "As long as I get paid, as I mentioned, I'm not interested." Gritting his teeth and scratching his neck, Tamura reflected on the events of the past few days. "This is all that kid's fault. If he hadn't stopped me at USJ, I wouldn't have to go to that asshole Jiren to get more people. If only we had killed All Might," Tamura thought as he looked up at the mall in front of him, which he detested because it was a gathering place for idiots, and the people were reassured by the idea that heroes would always come to their aid. "Perhaps killing a few people here will help me feel better," he thought before entering the building. As he was walking around, he noticed the target of his rage, a child who was just standing in the middle of the mall, carefree. It would be so easy to kill him right then and there, but as Tamura got closer to Izuku, he had an idea that perhaps this child knew the answer to his question, so instead of killing him right there, he put his hand around his neck and led him to a bench by the fountain so they could talk. "I was going to kill you, still might actually, but there's something you might be able to help me with." Tamura rasped as Izuku glared at him, his mind racing with ideas about how to escape this, but for the time being, he would just have to comply. "So, what is it?" As Tamura scratched at his neck, Izuku inquired. "As you can see, everyone has been talking about the hero killer a lot. In fact, they believe that my Nomu was involved in his scheme to murder more heroes. Everyone is behaving as though my experience at USJ never happened. Why is that? What's the difference, and why is he so captivating to everyone, when we're both just killing what we don't like?" Tamura growled, gripping Izuku's neck tightly, causing the young hero to grit his teeth against the pain. "So what's the answer?" As he listened to the madman, Izuku realized that the question was actually valid. What was the difference between Tamura and Stain? "Purpose, I think." Izuku responded instinctively, and Tamura looked at Izuku as though he had spoken a different language. Izuku had never intended to actually respond to Tamura, preferring to buy time while he babbled on. "Goal?" Tamura said, "Explain that," while Izuku coughed and collected his thoughts. "When someone fights to change something that resonates with people, even if they approach it incorrectly, you can't help but respect them for it. Everyone has something they dislike about the world, and most people choose to accept it rather than change it. Stain believed he was acting to alter the way heroes behaved because he didn't like it. Even though it was a terrible and monstrous solution, he brought about change, but you only want to kill and destroy for the sake of destroying. You have no objective. You would have simply moved on to another hero you disliked even if you had killed All Might at the USJ. Izuku told Tamura, "That's not a goal, you're just a dog chasing car after car." He discovered that this also applied to himself. Izuku was currently pursuing All Might's shadow, but what would he do once he caught it? He needed a purpose beyond simply filling All Might's shoes. As Izuku had his own epiphany, Tamura was confused by what the boy had said. A dog chasing cars am I? He asked himself. Affecting change, a purpose? What is my purpose? He asked himself, and after giving it some thought, he concluded, destruction is my purpose. I will continue to destroy everything I hate, and I'll use the hero killer's ideology to do so. How do you like that, Stain? You'll help me the man you deem unworthy do unspeakable acts all in your name, starting with the destruction of All Might. Izuku noticed the twisted smile on Tamura's face as he laughed a little and said, "Thanks, you really helped me out there. I believed that there might be a problem with my approach, but it turns out that I was simply overthinking things." Deku. Izuku wrenched his gaze away from Tamura and looked at Ochako, who was standing a few feet away. His heart seemed to stop in his chest as he thought about her passing away, and Tamura quickly released Izuku. Tamura whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were here with your girlfriend. If you follow me, I'll kill everyone I see until you catch me." He got up and walked away into the crowd, saying, "I'll leave a nice trail of mangled bodies for you to follow." Ochako ran towards Izuku and tightly gripped him. "Are you okay, Izuku? Who was that?" Izuku kept staring at Tamura's back when she asked. "What is all for one planning, Shigaraki?" Without even skipping a beat or glancing back, Tamura answered. "I don't know." Izuku coughed and rubbed his neck as he vanished into the crowd, but he could still feel Tamura's hand there, like a ghostly limb, encircling his neck. Izuku stood with the rest of his class while the police searched the mall for any indication of Shigaraki, but all of that was background noise as Izuku's mind was focused on one thing. How could I have allowed this to happen? Master Splinter taught me to be constantly aware of my surroundings, so I should have sensed Shigaraki. What if one of my friends or worse, one of the girls had been the target of Shigaraki's pursuit instead of me? The look on Izuku's face made Jiro, who had been standing close to him, feel cold all over and her body started to perspire. His green eyes appeared completely black, lacking the warmth and compassion for which he was known, and his mouth had a deep frown that said a lot for someone who was obsessed with smiling all the time. She didn't like that look and jabbed Izuku in the arm with one of her jacks in an attempt to shake him out of it. Looking at Jiro, Izuku jumped and rubbed his arm, asking, "What was that for, Jiro?" "Oh, sorry about that. I was just trying to get you out of your funk." She rubbed the back of her head as Izuku nodded. He asked with an irritated expression, but the expression he had earlier vanished, leaving Jiro to question whether it had ever existed in the first place. When a policeman approached Izuku and asked to talk to him, he said, "Yeah, sorry, I have a lot on my mind." He waved to Jiro before walking away, leaving the young girl wondering about the expression on Izuku's face and hoping she wouldn't see it again. As he reflected on the events of the day, Izuku and his mother rode home in a taxi. Upon noticing her son in such a state, Inko put a hand on his shoulder and said, "It's okay, Izuku. These things happen, but I'm glad you're safe." Izuku shook his head. "No, mother," I relaxed. "I can't allow that to happen again. I should have been more aware." As his mother shook her head, he slapped his palm on his thigh and said, "I need to be ready for anything. Izuku, you're not a god and you can't be everywhere. You just need to try your hardest and I'm sure that will be sufficient. Keep in mind that you're no longer alone." As they rode home, she rubbed his head and said, "I know you felt alone for a very long time growing up, but there are people who want to help you." On the following day, Izuku was standing outside the school bus while his classmates boarded it. After taking 2 rolls, he boarded last and sat down beside Toru as the invisible girl took hold of his arm and joyfully pulled it against her side. Izuku felt a stinging sensation on his neck and turned to face Mineta, who mouthed the words, "Et tu, Midoriya." As the bus ride started, Izuku sighed, realizing that would be a hassle to deal with later. Kirishima remarked, "I wonder where the camp's at." As he thought about bikinis, Denki remarked, Maybe it'll be at the beach littered with babes." When Jiro said, "Not even in your wettest dreams, Zap Trap," Denki's bubble burst. The bus soon came to a halt at a cliff with a view of a forest, while the kids made predictions about the journey. Thank heavens for a bathroom break at last. Looking at an empty cliffside, Mineta screamed as she ran off the bus. Where's the restroom? Mineta inquired as two women wearing skirts, cat ears, and paws emerged from a car that had pulled up beside the bus. We are the wild pussycats. Hello, kids. As they struck a pose for the students, the two spoke simultaneously. Izuku began by explaining the pussycats in great detail before Pixie Bob grabbed his face. Oh yeah, I know these guys. Izuku nodded and she hissed, we're young at heart, don't forget it. Mandalay, speaking for her countrymen, started to clarify what this meant. Children, welcome to the lodge at the foot of this cliff, where you will be spending your summer training camp. You only need to survive our beasts forest, but be aware that you won't be able to eat anything if you don't arrive by noon. You are allowed to use your eccentricities as much as you like because this land belongs to the pussycats, Mandalay told the anxious children. Pixie Bob shifted the ground beneath their feet and threw them over the side, leaving them in a dusty heap at the base. Denki said, "Aw come on, this is just a joke, let's get back on the bus." Mineta leapt up from the body pile and fled into the forest. He yelled, I need to find a tree or a bush or something. When he had finally located a spot, he heard a loud growl and turned to see a big rock lizard. As the stone monster swung its maw wide in his direction, Mineta declared, I don't need to go anymore. Mineta gazed down this stone monster's throat. Warmth poured down his leg as he thought about a lot of things. Then the world was jerked to the left, and the creature in front of him became blurry. Snatching the young boy away from the creature as he heard it crash into the tree Mineta had been standing in front of to urinate, Iida held fast to Mineta's collar. It wasn't until he was directly beside Mineta that Iida realized he was moving and had the foresight to grab the boy. Iida's feet skidded on the ground. Oh no, I should have put on the high traction boots I purchased at the shopping center. As another stone monster materialized, Iida pondered. It was looking to peck at Iida with its sharp stone beak and triceratop-like horns. I have no grip and I can't move out of the way. As he kept skidding straight at the lethal beak, Iida thought, but as the body fell to the ground, the creature's head exploded in a shower of dust and rock fragments. Izuku pulled out of his stance, shaking dust from his blackened fist, and Iida stopped, holding Mineta to his chest like a baby chimp to its mother's breasts. The two of them turned to face Izuku. As the class approached, Izuku asked, Are you two okay? Iida gazed at the remnants of the stone beast and nodded, removing Mineta from his chest. As more crashes could be heard and more golems emerged to attack the students, Iida remarked, It's hollow, guess they're not alive. As each student got ready to fight and started tearing through the golems, Bakugo walked forward and said, All that means is we don't have to hold back. Before acting hastily, Izuku paused to observe each of his classmates, aware of their locations. I need to regain my focus and become conscious of my surroundings and other people. I will never be taken by surprise again. Before removing his shirt and jacket, tying them around his waist, and entering the fray, he swore and tied the tie from his uniform around his eyes. Smell for the smell of turned earth. Listen, feel the air against your skin, and take it all in. Izuku ducked to his left, then punched the creature next to him, breaking it with a blow. He then raised his arms in time to block one of the monster's blows and use an uppercut kick to break its skull. Bakugo turned his attention from the stone beast he had just destroyed to observe Izuku fighting while wearing a blindfold. He yelled, You shitty nerd, you think you can outdo me? Before he hurried forward, closing his eyes and launching blasts in multiple directions. From the cliffside, Aizawa, Mandalay, and Pixie Bob observed the students' development. As she used her golems to manipulate the students, Pixie Bob thought to herself, Oh you cheeky so-and-so, if you're going to do that, then I'm going to do this. Where do you think you're going, girlie? Get back here. Through the use of binoculars, Aizawa observed his students' reactions to this challenge. Todoroki, Bakugo, and Midoriya were the front runners, as he had anticipated, but Iida was one of the three. His encounter with the hero killer has undoubtedly helped him mature. In my opinion, it couldn't have come at a better moment. After such an encounter, he will be more receptive to our instruction. Aizawa grinned and took down the binoculars. I can't wait to mold your minds. In various states of confusion, the students started to emerge from the forest. As he panted, Izuku removed his blindfold to wipe perspiration from his forehead. Even though his body ached, the experience of learning was worthwhile. Todoroki was on his right, shivering a little as steam poured out of his mouth, followed by Bakugo on his left, standing tall but panting as his coat and shirt were flung open, and Iida on his left, with his pants legs torn below the knee and his hands on his knees panting. Pixie Bob circled Iida, Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki and exclaimed, Well done, you only got here an hour late, We're really impressed, especially with you four. I think I'm going to keep you. When the class's girls noticed this, Toru shifted and ran into Izuku as he staggered out of Pixie Bob's clutching paws. Please refrain from touching our Izuku. As the girls gazed at the blonde heroine, this was their main thought. Izuku saw a child standing off to the side as he straightened himself out. He approached the boy wearing shorts, a white t-shirt, and a horned worker's cap, seeing an opportunity to get away from Pixie Bob. As the boy drew back and punched, Izuku stood to the side of his blow and said, "Hey, I'm Izuku Midoriya, nice to meet you." He held out his hand. Since Izuku was able to easily dodge his blows, he asked the boy to swing at him again, saying, Let's try that again. I'm Izuku, and you are?" The boy turned away from him and stalked away, growling. As Mandalay approached beside the boy, Izuku straightened up and watched him leave. Izuku looked at Mandalay and nodded in agreement before returning to his class as they all entered the lodge where they would be spending the summer. "Nice try, that's Kota, my nephew. Don't take his attitude personally, he's going through some things." The students arrived for dinner after they had settled in. Izuku couldn't take his eyes off the young boy sitting by himself with a frown on his face, even though he thought the food was really delicious. After securing a seat beside him on his left, Jiro inquired, "Are you worried about him, Midoriya?" Izuku shrugged as he turned to face her. Izuku vented his concerns to the earphone girl, who smirked at him and said, he seems so angry, and kind of sad. I'd like to talk with him more, but I don't think he likes me very much." Jiro patted him on the shoulder and remarked, "You're just too nice for your own good, you know that." Jiro returned to her meal and said, "I'm sure you'll get him to come around, you're pretty stubborn in your own way." Izuku grinned as he finished his own meal. The men were in their room getting ready for the bath after supper. Ojiro asked, observing Izuku do handstand push-ups, "Hey Izuku, are you coming with us to the bath?" A sigh came from Ojiro as Izuku grunted, In a minute Mashirao, I'll catch up later." As he left the room to go to the bath, Ojiro remarked, "You're a real workhorse, you know that." After taking a deep breath and hefting the wrist and ankle weights he had strapped on prior to the start of the camp, Izuku leapt out of his handstand position and landed on his feet. As the idea of the gravity chamber brought back memories of Melissa's shield, he questioned, "This is nothing compared to the gravity chamber. How am I supposed to keep up my regiment under normal gravity?" He took out his phone and dialed Melissa's number, saying, "I haven't called her in a while. I should check in." The second ring caught her attention. Melissa hardly suppressed her excitement at hearing Izuku's voice as she said, "Hi stranger, it's been some time." She said, "So what's up?" And Izuku grinned at how happy she always seemed. Leaning against the window and gazing out at the darkened forest, Izuku explained, "Oh nothing. I was just thinking about you, and I thought I'd check in and see how you were." As Izuku reflected on what had transpired since his return, she said, "How sweet you were thinking of me. Nothing's going on over here really. I don't think my dad's conference went well, but he won't tell me what happened, so there's that. How about you, any new developments?" Before Melissa laughed, Izuku remarked, "Nothing really. Oh, I wore the full armor, you didn't tell me, it was so light, it feels like it's not even there." Only you would think that, Izuku. It feels light to you because you are able to withstand 100 times Earth's gravity. Anyone else who puts on that suit probably won't be able to move well if at all, but I'm glad you like it. There are no problems or concerns?" she asked as Izuku nodded. "Nope, not any that I could see, but as much as I'd like to keep talking with you, Melissa, I need to hit the bath and get ready for tomorrow. Mr. Aizawa promised tomorrow he'd put us through hell and I believe him," Izuku replied with a sigh. Izuku's neck burned as she whispered into the phone, "Okay, I get it, but call me again soon when you're alone." After hearing her answer, he hung up and shook his head before getting his toiletries and going to the bathroom. Sure, bye." As Izuku walked down the hall, she noticed the two openings, one with a blue sign for men and one with a red sign for women. Before entering the actual bath, he undressed in the changing room under the blue sign. The bath appeared more empty than it should have with 13 other men in it, but he assumed that was just the thick steam hiding his fellow men. He couldn't see much because of the steam. Izuku took a seat in front of the showerheads and started cleaning himself before washing his hair and closing his eyes. He felt someone press their chest against his back from behind him while he was sitting there with his eyes closed. Pushing his hand against the person's chest and pushing, he said, "Come on guys, don't fool around in the bath." He heard a distinctly unmanly yelp. Izuku stared at a naked Jiro with her hands pressed to her chest, his eyes bucked open. Izuku looked at the girl and exclaimed, "Kei Kyoka," before noticing the other girls relaxing by the bathtub. Splashing a little water in the bath, Mina said, "Nice of you to join us, Midori, why don't you come over?" The water's fine. Izuku was unsure of where to look because all he saw was bare female skin. He yelled, "WWH what?" as the girls joyfully giggled. Sue gave Toru a high five and remarked, "Nice going with the signs, Toru Ribbit." Why you thought I was a guy?" Kyoka said, covering her face as she fell to the ground. Jiro yelled, glaring at Izuku, "I pressed my chest against you and you thought I was a guy." Izuku exclaimed, "Kyoka, it's not what you think." As Minetta's voice could be heard clearly, Izuku said, "Oh no, if he sees me here, the guys will murder me." As he stood up and started to go to the door, only to see Koda on the wall, successfully foiling Minetta's plan, before he saw the girls, was shocked into unconsciousness, and fell to the opposite side of the wall. Izuku threw out his arm, grabbed hold of Koda before he could fall all the way, and pulled him back towards himself and the girl's side, eliminating any chance that he would be found in the girl's bath. Jiro looked at the unconscious child and asked, "Oh my gosh, is he okay?" Her embarrassment vanished from her mind. Izuku wrapped a towel around his waist and said, "I think so, I'll take him to Mandalay." Then, relieved for the reprieve, he ran out of the girl's bath. The girls had switched the signs around, and he had no idea what they had in store for him. As he reached the lounge where he discovered Mandalay, he told himself, "I need to have a talk with them. I understand they want to spend time together, but that was dangerous." As Mandalay examined Koda, Izuku laid him on the couch and said, Ms. Mandalay, Koda had a little accident in the bath. I don't think he's hurt, just stunned." Izuku nodded, thinking of Mineta, and shook his head at the antics of the living grape. "Thanks for bringing him here. We were told that the physical embodiment of lust was in your class, so I asked Koda to keep an eye out." Izuku sighed and said, "Mandalay, if it's okay with you, may I ask why Koda always seems so angry?" Izuku nods in response to her question. "Koda's parents were heroes. You may have heard of the water hose duo?" Mandalay nodded as he explained, "They were a pair of heroes who specialized in rescue, right? They fell in the line of duty, I heard. It was all over the news, and though everyone said they died a hero's death to Koda, it was like his parents left him behind. Koda doesn't like heroes because to him heroes are just people willing to leave behind the people that care about them." Mandalay clarified as Izuku massaged the back of his forehead. It was a lot to process. Izuku had adored heroes for as long as he could remember, and he couldn't fathom a child seeing this world full of them and not falling in love. He was essentially parading around in a towel when Mandalay explained, "You should get dressed, you might catch a cold." When he became aware that he had been conversing with an adult woman while essentially nude, his face flushed. Sorry," he yelled as he ran out of the room, and Mandalay turned to face her nephew after watching him leave. Class 1A assembled in front of Aizawa the following morning as he started outlining the goal of this training camp. Aizawa threw the ball to Izuku, who looked at it, nodded, then called up his full cowl and threw it as hard as he could. "You have all experienced several extreme moments during your time at UA, and I'm sure all of you feel as if you're much stronger than when you first enrolled. Why don't we have a demonstration of how strong you've gotten from our class representative? Midoriya, throw this ball with all you've got." The ball left Izuku's hand with a sonic boom and shot through the air so fast that it sheared itself apart, scattering metal fragments throughout the forest. As an error message appeared on his scanner, Aizawa glanced at it before turning to face Izuku. Before getting another ball and throwing it to Bakugo, he said, "Okay, that was a mistake on my part. All right, Bakugo, throw it." After glaring at Izuku and Aizawa, Bakugo threw the ball as hard as he could. The ball traveled 709 meters in the air. After glancing at the screen, Bakugo clenched his hand and snarled to himself. "See what I mean? The only progress you've made is mental. Your minds are more developed and geared towards hero work, but your quirks are lagging behind. The purpose of this training camp is to have your quirks expand as well. Like building a house brick by brick, we'll strengthen your quirks." The pupils nodded in anticipation of what Aizawa had in the store. Shigaraki considered his new strategy while he sat at the bar and swirled his drink. As Kurogiri was cleaning a glass, he thought to himself, "Every time I think about what's going to happen, I can't help but smile." Kurogiri complimented Shigaraki, who grinned. "I was quite surprised with this plan, Shigaraki. It's good to see that you're thinking of the long game now." Tamura held up a picture of Izuku and Katsuki and said, "If you're surprised at this, wait until you see what's next." He then placed one in each hand, and as his fingers touched the images, they gradually started to fall apart. As Toga emerged, Dabi and the other Vanguard Action Squad members stood in a dark corner. As Dabi nodded, she exclaimed, "Tamura's shipment arrived, there's enough for everyone," with excitement. "He's finally working towards Stain's philosophy," He might be worth working under after all. Who gives a damn? When do I get to kill people? A gigantic figure wearing a mask and black cloak yelled. Dobby shook his head, glancing at the figure. Dobby, gazing out at the forest in front of them, said, "Just shut up and wait. All right, you'll get your chance soon enough. It's time we knock the heroes from their pedestals." Vlad King led Class 1B as they yawned through the forest. The star had just begun to peek over the horizon, and it was a little after sunrise. They heard voices and what sounded like screaming as they moved. When they emerged from the tree line and saw the 1A students in varying states of physical exertion, Monoma questioned, "What are those idiots in Class 1A doing now?" As the entire quartet of the Pussy Cats made their debut striking a group pose, Vlad King explained, "I wouldn't call them idiots, Monoma. After all, Class A has had the spotlight for the entire first semester. This training camp to strengthen your quirks will ensure that Class B will be the headliners of the second semester." As the Pussy Cats took over the explanation, Kendo questioned, Mr. Vlad, how are we going to be trained? There's like 40 students here." "Don't worry your precious heads about that. With all 4 of us here, training 40 kids is a walk in the park." "That's right, we'll be taking over your training now. Try not to bawl your eyes out after we start. I'm Ragdoll. My quirk is search, and with it I can keep track of 100 people," said Ragdoll with bright eyes as she laughed at the pupils. Tiger pointed to a number of other students who were each doing different exercises and exclaimed, "That's right, all of you with strength quirks, get over here. I'll tear your pitiful quirks apart and turn them into something amazing at my boot camp." Tiger yelled, "Midoriya, show me what you've got," as Izuku, who had been performing inverted sit-ups, fell from a tree. After landing, he put on his snake cowl and launched himself into an ambush, smashing his fist as it rocketed straight towards a tree before turning left and continuing into the forest, avoiding tree after tree, until it slammed into a large oak, leaving an impression of his fist in the bark as his arm withdrew. Izuku's fist imprints were seen in multiple trees, each farther apart, by Class 1B. Izuku saluted, leaping into a tree, grabbing hold of a sturdy branch, and repeatedly raising his knees to his chest as Tiger yelled, "Not good enough, you only managed to go 3 trees past your previous one, now give me some hanging crunches." Tiger crooked a claw and turned to face the power-based pupils in Class 1B. With a sly smile, he said, "Come on, you want to go plus ultra, don't you?" By the end of the day, every student was so tired and sore that not even Monoma had the energy to disparage. Class A Ragdoll shook her paw at the students as they divided into groups to begin preparing the curry for supper. "Okay kids, if you're hungry, I suggest you get to work. Like we said, we won't be cooking for you anymore. From now on you'll be cooking your own meals, so get started, and don't think we'll settle for some run-of-the-mill cat chow," she said. Ojiro helped Izuku, who offered to go get the firewood. Mashirao declared, "I have the axe, Izuku." Izuku then punched into the wood logs to split them. Ojiro shook his head, and Izuku responded, "Thanks Mashirao, but I'm good like this." Ojiro grabbed the next log of wood and split it with his tail, saying, "You're really something else, you know that. Even after all that you still want to train. Well, don't hog it all for yourself." Denki yelled, "Those two are insane," as she observed the 2 boys using their respective limbs to break wood. "Fucking Izuku thinks he's hot shit," Bakugo, without even glancing at the cutting board, snarled as he sliced an onion to pieces with his knife. Bakugo gave him a glare when Kirishima teased him, saying, "Wow, with knife skills like those you'll make a great wife someday." He yelled, "The fuck you say to me," as Iida tried to step in. As Mashirao and Izuku returned with the firewood, Iida gave the order, "That's enough, you two, we need to work together to get this job done." Mina shouted, "Hey Midori, come put some wood in my stove." Izuku almost dropped all of his wood, but Mashirao's tail saved him. He stutteringly exclaimed, "WWW what?" as he glanced around, realizing that nobody had understood Mina's double entendre. As he started to load some of the wood into the oven, he approached her, flushed. "Mina T, that's not funny," he said, glancing at the pink girl, who, based on the expression in her eye, not only disagreed but also had no plans to stop. Izuku did his best to ignore Mina's teasing as she licked her lips and said, "Gently now Midori, don't just force it in there, she's a tender little stove." Izuku jumped up, and Mina whispered heavily, "Oh, that's a big one, I don't know if she can take it all. You've already stuffed so much in her." He shambled away, embarrassed to admit that Mina's joke had really aroused him. I think that's enough, you can handle it from here, right?" Izuku occasionally saw Kota still wearing that perma-frown on his face as he went to scatter more firewood among the ovens. Todoroki noticed what Midoriya was staring at and saw him sigh, wondering what he could do. As Izuku nodded and watched the two-tone boy set the wood on fire, he asked, "You're really invested in the boy, hun?" As Izuku considered what he had said and recognized that Todoroki was speaking from experience, Shoto questioned, "That's just you, isn't it? You can't help but meddle in other people's problems, can you?" "Oh yeah, I kind of did the same to you, didn't I? I'm sorry, it's just when I see people unhappy I want to help in any way I can," Izuku replied with a nod. As someone called for him to light their stove, Todoroki wiped his hands off and said, "I can see that, but take it from someone who's had your help before, it's really annoying to have someone poke at your sensitive spots. I know you're trying to help, but think of it from their point of view. A virtual stranger is prying into things you'd rather not think or talk about. Whether it's good-natured or not, it's still an invasion." After considering what Todoroki had said, Izuku realized what he was trying to say. Izuku thought to himself, maybe I should apologize. Koda frowned as he sat on the precipice overlooking the forest. As he saw some metal next to him, he remarked, "Those guys are idiots thinking they can be heroes, and training their stupid quirks thinking it really matters. Being a hero is the worst thing ever." Flipping it over between his fingers, he picked it up. He heard footsteps and asked out loud, "What is this?" Seeing that one guy from earlier, he leapt to his feet. The one he had attempted to strike but failed. "Wow, you're really good at disappearing. I didn't even know you were gone. Guess I still need to work on my awareness. Oh, you found a bit of the testing ball that I threw. I destroyed it accidentally." Izuku was rubbing his head. Koda clenched his fists and yelled, "Go away, this is my hideout, get out now." Izuku laughed a little before Koda yelled at him, "Oh, I didn't realize this was your hideout, it's really cool. I saw you didn't eat anything, so I thought I'd bring you a plate of curry. It's not great, but I'm told hunger is the best spice there is. Why do you even care? I don't know you and you don't know me, so just leave me alone. I don't want your stupid curry, so go away already. Go back to trying to improve your quirk so you can show off and get killed." Koda screamed once more as Izuku dropped. Koda gritted his teeth as Izuku explained, "Okay, full disclosure, I wanted to apologize. I've been trying to get to know you and maybe help you get out of your anger. I know that your parents were the water hose duo. People always tell me that my parents were heroes and died doing a hero's work. That's stupid. Heroes and villains, they're just people with an excuse to kill each other with their quirks. You know, I had a friend who was a lot like you once. He didn't have a quirk, you see, so he was really sad at first and then he was angry. It felt like the whole world had turned its back on him and left him behind." Izuku looked up at Koda. But after a while he realized that he could either stay mad at the world or he could do something about what was making him so angry. He decided to work hard and make a world where people aren't left behind, whether they have a quirk or are heroes. Even villains have people that care about them, he said while reflecting on how Shigaraki worked for the cause of all for one. Izuku nodded, and Koda remarked, "Is this your way of telling me to get over what happened, because if it is, you wasted your breath?" He put the plate down and then continued down the path, saying, "No, it's nothing like that. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. I'll leave you alone now." After standing there and observing him leave, Koda turned to face the curry plate on the floor. Ashido was almost asleep on her feet when Izuku looked at her the following morning. Izuku asked, "Are you okay, Ashido?" As the girl with the pink skin gave a shaky thumbs up. She swayed on her feet and said, "No prob Bob, I'm a-okay." As Izuku gave her a pat on the back, she explained, "Mr. Aizawa kept us up late studying. We didn't get to bed until like midnight and then had to wake up again at 5, so I'm just a little sleep deprived." As he watched Aizawa chew out Kirishima, Ochako, and Aoyama, he said, "Hang in there," and returned to his own workout routine. Izuku inquired, "Mr. Aizawa, is All Might going to be appearing at this training camp?" in the hopes of sparring the hero to see how far he had come. As Izuku felt Tiger clutch his head, Aizawa remarked, "No, he won't be. Now get back to work." Tiger growled as he dragged Izuku away for more difficult training, saying, "If you have time to talk, you have time to work, boy." The 40 pupils were assembled in a clearing in front of the Pussycats later that evening. As soon as Pixie Bob said, "Okay, kids, you worked hard today, so we figured it would be good to give you a little reward. Here we have the test of courage." The students cheered. Kirishima exclaimed, "Oh yeah, what a manly way to end the night," while Mina laughed. Before Aizawa's scarf wrapped around her, Kirishima, Shiro, Sato, and Kaminari blushed as she said, "In a dark and scary situation with a guy who knows what might happen." Mina's eyes widened when she heard, "The only tests you 5 will be participating in are supplementary mock tests." She yelled, "You've got to be kidding, Mr. Aizawa," while the other 4 grumbled. As the 5 were being drugged away, Kirishima whimpered, "Come on sir, we worked hard today, don't we deserve a break?" "No you don't, I told you. Those of you who failed would wish you hadn't been allowed to come to this camp, so let's go," he went on to explain. "Well that's unfortunate, oh well, now then onto the rules. First off it will be Class 1B's turn as the scare team. You will do your absolute best to terrify the Class 1A pairs. You are free to use your quirks, but no physical contact is to be made, alright?" Ragdoll clarified with a paw. As the students got closer, Mandalay said, "Class 1A, come on up and grab a number from this box. Those with matching numbers will be paired up." This gave Class B some time to get ready and enter the forest. Izuku was alone, so the other 5 girls in Class A looked at their numbers in the hopes that they would be paired with him. None of them were successful. As his classmates started to hike along the path, Izuku stood by himself and uttered the words, "Aw man." Izuku took some time to practice awareness. He sat down, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes to observe his surroundings. He could hear crickets chirping in the night and the wind rustling through the trees. He detected a variety of scents from those around him, including Yuga's body wash and Momo's perfume. He could sense the faint tremors of people moving around him and those shifting uncomfortably. Izuku used all of this to conjure up an image in his mind. A blurry forest background materialized, and then a red spark in the trees far away from him came to life. Mandalay was discussing with Pixie Bob the merits of the test of courage when she was abruptly flung forward toward the tree line. Before she opened her eyes and looked into the face of none other than Izuku Midoriya, she turned to face whatever was dragging her, but something slammed into her side and wrapped around her as she and whatever was holding her slid across the ground. The woman blushed when she saw that Izuku had her in his arms and asked, "Pixie Bob, are you okay?" Scrambling out of his arms, she said, Let go of me, what are you doing?" She turned to face the man who had pulled her, a red-haired man wearing sunglasses, jeans, dress shoes, and an open orange button-up shirt that showed a white t-shirt underneath. The man exclaimed, "I can't believe he ruined my entrance. I was going to crush that little kitty's head under my magnet." As a male lizard wearing clothes resembling Stain stood beside him. The lizard had a big sword across his back and a bandana across his face. "The kid's reaction speed is amazing. You should be thanking him for saving you, Blondie. I will acknowledge you, boy, as a true hero. You will not die this night. Allow us to introduce ourselves. I am Spinner, disciple of Stain, and this is Magna. We are members of the League of Villains Vanguard Action Squad," said Spinner. Izuku was looking directly at the two villains when Pixie Bob turned to face him. Before using her quirk Telepath, Mandalay said, "This is bad, I need to warn the others." When Mandalay's telepath emerged, Ochako and Sue were in the forest, holding hands against the darkness. With a single thought, Sue and Ochako glanced at each other before running back towards the trail's entrance. "Attention everyone, the training camp has been invaded by villains," they exclaimed. "We can't allow this to be another USJ because Izuku always takes the bad guys on head-on." In the classroom where Vlad King and Aizawa were conducting remedial classes. Aizawa glanced at Vlad before hurrying to the door. "All students are to return to the lodge immediately. Do not engage the villains at any cost. I repeat, the camp has been invaded by villains and all students are to return to the lodge," she said. As he hurried out the classroom door and barreled to the entrance, Aizawa said, "Vlad, protect the students. I'm going to go out and try to meet up with any students heading this way." He glanced to the side and saw his smiling Dobby just before he was consumed by blue flames. Mandalay realized she hadn't seen Koda since before dinner as she was relaying her message. Then she sent out another telepathic message, asking herself, "Oh no Koda, where are you always sneaking off to?" From his hiding place on the cliffside, Koda could see the blue lights in one area of the forest and a mass of purple smoke in another. Before he heard his aunt's voice in his mind, he growled, "What's going on? Did one of those idiots start a fire?" As Koda turned to hide in the cave, Mandalay said, "Koda, if you can hear this, I don't know where you are, but try to find a place to hide until I can find you. Don't move from there until I ask you to." However, a large masked figure was coming toward him. The masked man growled as he approached the edge of the cliff and removed his mask, saying, "This is just fucking great, I've got the worst position just because I'm new." He growled and turned to face Koda, saying, "And then they tell me to wear this piece of shit mask, because I'm too recognizable. What a bunch of shit." The face Koda saw reminded him of the death of his parents. The image of their killer, a blonde man with a threatening frown, appeared on his TV screen. Of course, the most obvious detail was that Muscular, the man who killed his parents, had lost his left eye in the process. He reached for Koda and said, "Nice hat, kid. Tell you what, I'll trade you this mask for it." Koda yelled, "You killed my parents, and stopped the man's hand while Muscular considered the charge. He was not going to deny it, of course. This child was most likely correct if he claimed to have killed his parents. The only question is, which pair were they? He smiled as he examined the child, paying attention to the eyes. Pointing to his scar and missing eye, he remarked, "Now I remember your parents were the water hose team, right? Man, that takes me back, you know, for a pair of C-listers they were able to give me this before I killed them." Kota punched the man's hand while clenching his fist. Kota yelled as the man got to his full height, "It's your fault they're dead. If it wasn't for you I'd still have my mom and dad." Kids these days are always quick to blame someone else for their troubles. "You're not wrong, I did kill your parents and I enjoyed it. That was my choice, but it was their choice to stand in my way, so whatever happened to them after that point was on them. I don't hold a grudge for them taking my left eye, so why are you holding a grudge for me killing them?" he inquired before tightening his grip. With his fist slamming to the ground, the man yelled, "But if you really want to see your mommy and daddy again, I'll send you to them on express," as the cliff erupted in dust. When he noticed there was no blood on his fist, the burly blonde pulled it back. He turned around and saw Kota in Izuku Midoriya's arms as green lightning arced around his body, and he said, "Oh, I see." Izuku put Kota down behind him and stood tall, saying, "The only person being sent somewhere on express is you to prison." He turned around as Muscular emerged in front of him, fibers emerging from his skin as he punched at Izuku, first slamming into his blocking arm and then sliding him across the ground into the wall with another burst of rock and dust. "Don't worry, Kota. I'm here to protect you." Muscular was interrupted when Izuku's fist struck his stomach, propelling the villain before he noticed that Izuku's hand was holding his shirt. "Is that the best you've got? You can't protect anyone with that weak-ass shi?" Muscular said. As he raised his head to trace the arm back to its origin, Izuku's scowling face filled his field of vision just before his fist struck his face, sending him reeling backwards. Muscular slid back, causing the rock to crack as he came to a halt, driving his legs deeply into it. As it cleared, dust rose from the ground's furrows, exposing Muscular's grin as he spat out a bloody tooth. He exclaimed, "Now that's a punch, kid. Looks like I can get serious after all," as he was covered in muscle fibers that exploded through his shirt. Kota observed this change while Izuku stood in front of him. As Kota turned to face the older boy, Izuku said, "I'll divert him, so run as quickly as you can back to the lodge. Don't look back, okay?" Kota grabbed Izuku's leg and yelled, "But what about you? You can't beat that guy. We should both run as fast as you or we can get away." Izuku gave a headshake. Recalling his conversation with Mandalay, Izuku turned to Kota and grinned, saying, "I can't. If I do he'll just chase us or go after someone else. No, I have to keep him here no matter what. I promised Mandalay I'd protect you. Don't make a liar out of me." Izuku turned to face Mandalay as she mentioned Kota. As Mandalay gazed at him, Izuku remarked, "I know where he is, Mandalay. I can go get him and bring him back to the lodge." For such a private reason, she didn't want to put Izuku's life in danger, but before she could turn him down, he vanished, leaving a trail of red steam in his wake. Mandalay tightened her jaw. Before turning to face Spinner, she said, "He took the choice out of my hands before I could tell him no. Eraserhead, you have really disobedient students." As he felt Muscular rush towards him and take off at the same moment, Izuku sank his fist into his arm and said, "This is what it means to me to be a hero." As the two approached each other, Izuku's fist slammed forward, slamming into Muscular's chest, but there was no response. "What?" Muscular chuckled as his enormous arm threw Izuku back into the mountain after clothes lining him. Blood spurted from the boy's mouth as the broken stone tore at his back, causing him to cough. Muscular yelled, hammering his chest like an ape, "That was a solid hit, kid. If I were anyone else I'd be on my ass right now, but my fibers can take heavier hits than that," before launching himself in the direction of Izuku's landing. Izuku leapt into the air as he saw Muscular approaching, then fired a foot downward, landing on Muscular's back and sending him to the ground. As Muscular hit the ground on his hands and knees, he yelled, "Stamp smash!" Izuku pulled his foot away and began to fall in Muscular's direction, landing on the cliff. As the boy took off, Izuku yelled, "Kota, run now!" The last thing he saw was Muscular leaping from the ground he had face planted in and kicking Izuku in the stomach, which caused him to retreat back into the cliffside where more fissures were appearing in the stone. Muscular yelled, "My fibers can take a lot more than that. Come on and let loose on me," before recalling what Shigaraki had said. "Damn, I have to ask, do you know a guy named Bakugo? We're here for him for some reason." Muscular sighed. "That's right, he's basically covered himself in muscle fibers. They're meant to stretch and bend. It's a lot like my snake cowl. If I want to beat him I have to tear those fibers apart, but what do they want with Katsuki? No, one thing at a time. Izuku was thinking to himself. Just as a burst of energy erupted from where the boy stood, Muscular leapt forward toward Izuku and threw him back. He exclaimed, "What the hell is that?" as the dust cloud was blown away, revealing Izuku. However, he was covered in a bright yellow energy that resembled sunlight rather than his green lightning or the red steam of either of his known full cowls. With its long ears perched atop his head and 9 tails gently wafting behind him, it encased his body and created the outline of what looked to be a fox. Sorry I had to hold back because Koda was here. I couldn't risk blowing him away or collapsing this place with him around, but now that he's gone I'll do as you say and give it my all. I call this my Kyuubi cowl and with it I'm going to beat you, Izuku yelled. Koda heard another explosion and saw the cliffside light up as though the sun was rising as he ran down the path from his hiding place. He paused there, watching the bright yellow light. He was aware of what Midoriya had told him, but he would wait for him down here no matter what because he couldn't flee when he was putting his life in danger. He remembered something his aunt had told him. You might not get it now, Koda, but you will eventually. There will be a hero who brightens your life with their deeds and demonstrates that heroes are most visible in the shadows. Your son will be that hero. While Izuku was an intern, Izuku was flat on his front with his cheek pressed against the gravity chamber floor. He pressed his hands to the ground and started to push up green lightning that was arcing from his body, but he could only reach his hands and knees at that point. Looking at his arms straining under his own weight, he moaned, 75 gigaseconds is really something. It was odd that the perspiration wasn't rushing down his arms and onto the ground, even though he could see it bubbling from his skin. As he was pushed back to the floor, his vision swimming, he thought, I must be hallucinating. Yes, he could simply give a voice command to turn off the gravity, but he refused. It wasn't that speaking at all required an enormous amount of effort, but Izuku realized that issuing that order would mean resigning, and he couldn't do that because he had too much riding on it. There were only a few days left for him to use this chamber. If he couldn't reach 100 gigaseconds by then, he wouldn't know when he would get another chance. Izuku shouted to himself as his vision gradually began to darken. Wake up, wake up, wake up. All of a sudden, Izuku found himself in a familiar setting of the black landscape where he had previously encountered one for all users. He scanned the area in the dark, where a bright yellow light blazed swiftly through the shadows. A man approached him, bringing light with each step until he eventually stood in front of him. He had a pair of fox ears protruding from his short, blonde hair. He seemed to radiate joy from his sky-blue eyes. 3 horizontal lines, one above the other on each cheek, crinkled in a smile, adorning his face. The man, dressed in a long-sleeved orange shirt, black pants, and sandals, had 9 equally blonde tails that floated from behind him. The man grinned and rubbed his nose with his bandaged right hand. You really are a hard worker, Izuku. I'm impressed you got here so fast, and a gravity chamber the modern world is crazy, he said. This was a voice Izuku recognized. The man stood tall and nodded, saying, You're the man from back at the sports festival and the one I talked to last time. With a proud expression, Naruto stated, Yep, I am the 6th user of one for all Naruto Uzumaki, though most people knew me by my hero name, Kyuubi no Kitsune. As Izuku gazed at Naruto, he remarked, I didn't think I'd meet you so soon, but I hoped for it, and now it's here. Your body is ready to receive my quirk. Naruto looked at Izuku and nodded. I have a lot of questions, but you probably don't have a lot of time. Luffy was only with me for a minute or two, I think. A lot was going on. Well, you're right, I won't be like this for long, but I will be here longer than Luffy. Back then your body wasn't ready to receive Luffy's power, so it was a rush job, which is why it was so hard for you to control his power without him in your head to walk you through it. I was supposed to be the first aspect you met, Naruto said with a smirk. As Izuku tilted his head, Naruto explained, You see, it would have been easier for you to use my power with the training you received. He started to say, You mean? But Naruto interrupted him. The man pressed his thumb against his chest and exclaimed, That's right, I was trained as a ninja too. Back in my day. Wow, can't believe I said that, but anyway, when I was a hero it wasn't as legal as it is now. It required stealth to do what we did and I was trained for that at a young age, so the others and I thought I'd be the perfect starter for you. But Luffy did what he does best, whatever he wants. Naruto laughed. As Naruto held up his bandaged hand, a blue sphere gradually came to life and grew until it was the size of a baseball. I see, so what is your quirk? Izuku asked. Naruto clenched his fist as the ball exploded in a torrent of wind, resembling the moment at the sports festival when Izuku was freed from Shinso's grasp. My quirk is called Rasengan. I can pull energy into my palm, spinning it at high speed to tear through anything. Of course, like Luffy, One for All has powered it up quite a bit, so who knows what you might be able to do with it now. Naruto nodded, and Izuku said, so that's what that was. I always wondered what happened back then. Naruto pushed his fist toward Izuku, who after a moment pressed his own against Naruto's and watched his light flow into him. You weren't ready then, but you are now, and we are all looking forward to where you go with our powers. I don't think it was a coincidence that you were the person One for All opened up to. I think like us, One for All saw your potential and wanted to help you go beyond us, and finish what we couldn't. You will beat All for One Izuku Midoriya. Believe it, Naruto said. A red light was visible in the gravity chamber as Izuku stood up, encased in a red energy that resembled a fox with ears but only one tail. Thank you, Naruto, I won't waste this power or your trust in me. Izuku's bright form caught Muscular's attention, with 9 tails fluttering behind him and his body glowing like the sun. In his lifetime, Muscular had engaged in combat and killed many influential figures, but none had ever made him doubt himself as much as this boy. Muscular considered fleeing a fight for the first time, but the villain's joyful smile, which split his face in a manic grin, quickly swept the idea away. With his entire body bound in muscle fibers, he yelled, well, look at that, you fucking evolved like a goddamn Poké copyright mon. I hope this transformation comes with a whole lot of power. The villain jumped forward, his force breaking the cliff's edge as he punched forward and slammed his fist into Izuku. Muscular grinned until the dust settled and he realized he had only struck one of Izuku's tails, which appeared to be more durable than steel despite being translucent. Muscular jumped over the boy and landed on the mountainside, looking down at Izuku, whose once green eyes had turned orange with a vertical pupil centered on him. What the? Muscular exclaimed in shock before barely escaping a blow from one of Izuku's tails, feeling it sever his cheek. He snarled and lunged at Izuku, slamming both fists down on the boy who blocked with another tail before swatting Muscular into the air. The villain coughed, feeling the blow even through his muscle fibers. That's some tough shit there, kid. When Muscular looked down and saw that Izuku was gone, he turned around and discovered Izuku standing above him. In the spare seconds of 0G, Muscular looked at Izuku as he raised his hand palm open and a green ball of swirling energy appeared in it. He growled and punched forward, only to find all 4 of his limbs bound by Izuku's tail as the two reached the apex of their height. Izuku's gaze shifted from Muscular to the sphere he was holding. He yelled, Rasengan Smash, as he pushed the ball into Muscular's abdomen. To the villain's horror, he saw the ball rip through his muscle fibers like a drill before striking his stomach, blowing him spiraling down towards the cliff and smashing into and through the stone, causing the entire cliff to collapse. He also hacked up blood onto Izuku's face. Uncertain of how, Mandalay turned to face the 2 villains in front of her and grinned as she heard the sound of an earth-shattering explosion and saw something bright shining in the night sky like a sun at midnight. She was certain that Koda was safe now. As Pixie Bob glanced at the enormous dust plume and nodded before beckoning the students to follow her, Mandalay remarked, Pixie Bob, get the students out of here. Tiger and I will handle these 2. After glancing at the dissipating smoke, Dobby raised his head and grinned, before the hero fell towards him and pulled Dobby's head against his knee, knocking the villain backwards until Aizawa's scarf pulled taut. He exclaimed, wow, you really are the real deal, aren't you, Eraser? Aizawa yelled, why are you here? What is your objective? Although he was concerned about his students, he had to put his students' needs first for the time being so that he would know how to respond if he discovered who the villains were. Dobby glanced at Aizawa and shook his head. Dobby responded, you're pretty good at defending yourself. I wonder if the same can be said for your precious students. Aizawa glared and then yanked his scarf in his direction, tearing it as Dobby fell into the mud. Aizawa gazed at the pile of dirt on the ground before a dust plume rose from the earth and a light burst into the sky. He hurried off to the clearing where the students had last been gathered in the hopes of meeting them on their way to the lodge, saying, they're after the students, I need to find them. As dust screamed past him, causing his skin to prickle, Koda covered his face. He opened his eyes and saw a glowing Izuku before him as he slowly pulled his arms away from his face. As the boy gazed at him, he said, I told you to run, Koda. As Koda felt Izuku's hand on his head, he began to cry and said, sorry, but I wanted to see you win, and you did. You protected me even though I was awful to you. He smiled and lifted Koda, holding him against his back with one of his tails, asking, how could I be a hero if I couldn't save you? He closed his eyes and summoned the forest imagery again before observing it light up with 8 red lights and the rest white. Now then, let's find out where everybody else is. He zeroed in on one in particular and discovered that he was staring at Mr. Aizawa. Izuku wrapped his tail tightly around Koda and pressed him against his back, saying, good, he's okay. As Koda followed Izuku's instructions, he felt a jerking motion and Izuku started running his arms behind him as he tore through the forest. Koda, keep your face pressed against my back and hold on tight. When Aizawa heard something hurrying toward him and a light growing steadily brighter, he halted his run. He couldn't tell if this was a villain or not, but it wasn't the blue light of Dabi's fire. The light abruptly went out, and he turned his red-eyed eyes. Aizawa disengaged his quirk as he turned around to see Midoriya standing directly behind him, robed in bright energy, and Koda in his arms. "Mr. Aizawa, it's me, don't use your quirk," Izuku yelled. "When and how did he follow me?" Before Koda was thrust into his arms, Aizawa pondered. "Here's Koda, he's not injured, but I need to tell Mandalay he's okay, so would you look after him for me? I also know who the villains are after, hopefully Mandalay can put the word out, for whatever reason they're here for Katsuki." Izuku clarified as Aizawa nodded. Before Izuku fled into the forest, his brilliant light fading from the pro in his charge, Aizawa said, "Okay. Go tell Mandalay everything you know, and when you do, give her this message." Koda asked, "Is he going to be okay, Mr. Aizawa?" as the expert sighed and looked down at the boy. He took Koda back to the lodge after saying, "I think so, but he's going to have a lot of explaining to do later." Tiger was slamming his fists against Magna's arms as they traded blows. Magna ducked away from Tiger to grab her weapon, but Tiger almost gave her an uppercut. "Geez, you're pushy. You could at least let me pick up my weapon," Magna yelled. "You don't have the right to complain, Kenji Hikiishi. You're a criminal wanted for multiple murders. How many lives have you treaded upon with no consideration for their feelings? That is why I will see to it you were brought down," Tiger yelled as he pursued Magna again. Mandalay ducked away from Spinner's assortment of blades, observing the male lizard and his homemade weapon. Spinner swung his sword once more, but it was shattered in two by what seemed to be a glowing tail. "What the?" Spinner yelled, noticing someone standing behind Mandalay. "What's wrong, hero? You can't beat me by dodging." The boy was the one who had rescued Pixie Bob. Izuku claimed, glancing at the two villains. "Mandalay, Koda's okay, I got him to Mr. Aizawa, who should be heading back to the lodge now." Mandalay's eyes widened at the amount of information she had been given, but she nodded. "I need you to use your quirk to tell Katsuki Bakugo that the villains are after him and should be guarded. He won't like it, but at least he'll know. Also, Mr. Aizawa told me to give you this message. The pro hero Eraserhead is granting all students permission to fight." With Izuku nodding, Mandalay said, "Okay, I'll let everyone know." Izuku hurried off as Mandalay used her quirk, saying, "Good, I'm going to try and help out where I can." As the two watched this natural freak slicing and moving through the forest with his teeth, Katsuki ducked back and landed beside Todoroki. Bakugo yelled, "What the fuck is this shit?" as Shoto blocked a tooth attack by forming a wall of ice. Then, in their minds, the two heard Mandalay's voice. "All students, take note. Katsuki Bakugo needs to be protected because he is being targeted by villains." A vein pulsing in Bakugo's right temple caused his eye to twitch at this point. He yelled, "The fuck did she just say?" and detonated an explosion to get away from another assault. All students are allowed to battle the villains from Eraserhead as well. Bakugo smiled at this. He shouted, "Like I wasn't going to do that already," and launched himself at the moonfish that had been revealed, but an ice wall between them stopped both of their attacks. As Bakugo rounded on him, Shoto calmly remarked, "Didn't you hear what Mandalay said? You need to be protected." In response, Katsuki said, "Like hell I do." Ragdoll stared at the monstrosity in front of her while crouching against a tree and gripping her right arm. Eraserhead must have told them about some Nomu thing. As she stood up and used her quirk, she hissed. Glancing at the monster, she saw no signs of weakness. Its hands shot out to seize Ragdoll, who ducked to the side as one hand smashed the tree she had been leaning against. "I can't handle this alone. I have to return to the others." Before she was slammed onto a stone slab, she felt something grab her leg and drag her along the ground. Blood spurted from her mouth and she felt her ribs crack. As the Nomu loomed over her, she raised her head and watched in horror as it opened its chest like a mouth, luring her inside, only to have something shine in the sky. The Nomu was struck by what appeared to be a huge ball of green light, which caused it to crash into the ground. A man of light was the last thing Ragdoll saw before fainting. Izuku's gaze shifted to Ragdoll, who was bleeding and lying there while he gingerly held her against his back with his tails. Before he started running through the forest with his newfound ability to perceive, he said, "Don't worry, Ragdoll, I'll get you help." He saw two white forms nearby, but only one of them was a huge white. Before concentrating, he asked himself, "What is that?" and was shocked to see that the enormous white figure was Tokiyami, who was pursuing Shoji. Izuku said, "I have to stop him without hurting him." Then he remembered Tokiyami's peculiarity and grinned. Izuku ran faster and exclaimed, "I'm coming to help Tokiyami," before bursting through the trees when he saw one of Dark Shadow's claws approaching Shoji. He yelled, "Stoop," and landed in front of Shoji, blocking him while forcing his feet into the ground and 4 of his tails backward. Izuku growled and threw Dark Shadow's claw backwards, causing him to flare his tails like a peacock and disperse the shadow beast as he fell to the ground. "Tokiyami, don't do this," Izuku said. As Shoji and Izuku stood beside him, Tokiyami begged, "I'm sorry I couldn't control Dark Shadow, please forgive me." When Shoji saw Izuku's glowing form, he said, "Thanks for the help, Midoriya. I don't know how I was going to get him to calm down." Izuku said, "No problem, Shoji, what happened here?" as Shoji bent over to assist Tokiyami in standing up. Tokiyami took over after Shoji spoke. "We were walking the path when I heard something and pushed Tokiyami out of the way with a dupliarm, but it was severed while doing so. It's not permanent or anything, but it does hurt. I couldn't help but feel angry that Shoji had been hurt saving me, so I called out Dark Shadow, but my anger was too much and Dark Shadow went out of control. Thank you for saving me from hurting anyone, Midoriya, I am in your debt." Tokiyami made a bow only for Izuku to forehead. Izuku was about to leave when Shoji interrupted him, saying, "You can repay me by taking Ragdoll back to the lodge. She's hurt pretty bad, so be careful. I'll find Katsuki." Shoji grasped Ragdoll and wrapped her in the webbing of his arms against his back, explaining, "He should be further down the path, they were ahead of us in order of taking the test of courage." Izuku said, leaping off again in the direction Shoji had directed him, "Thanks Shoji, get back safely." Izuku emerged from the treetops to watch Bakugo and Todoroki battle Moonfish. After assessing the situation, he leapt in just as Katsuki detonated an explosion, causing the villain to leap into the air directly in front of Izuku's punch, which slammed into the villain's mouth, shattering his teeth and splattering blood across his arm as he fell through a tree. After landing beside Izuku, Todoroki absorbed Izuku's transformed form. Izuku smirked and shrugged as he asked, "You have another new power?" Before Katsuki pushed Shoto away, he answered, "Just a new aspect of it." As Izuku sighed, he yelled, "Why'd you come here, Izuku? I could have taken him out, I didn't need your help." A vein pulsed in Katsuki's forehead as he glanced at Izuku. "I know you heard Mandalay's orders, Katsuki, that you need to be guarded, the villains are after you." Izuku shook his head, and he yelled, "Say that again, Izuku, I dare you." As Katsuki closed his eyes and looked around for his fellow students, Izuku said, "We don't have time for this, the others might be in danger." Although he discovered them strewn about, they appeared to be mostly safe. He turned to see Sue and Ochako's white outlines with an unidentified red person. He started to run away, making sure to slow down just enough to stay up with Shoto and Katsuki, saying, "Let's go that way." As Katsuki complained in the rear, Shoto inquired, "How can you tell where they are?" Izuku glanced at Shoto before continuing, "I've been focusing on my perception training since after the mall incident, so I think that my power has augmented my senses to the point where I can sense people from a distance. It's not perfect. I can't tell who's who unless I really focus, but I do know friend from foe," he stated as the three fled. With a knife in one hand and a tooth mask on, Sue and Ochako gazed at the girl in front of them. As Sue moved forward, she said to the two girls, "Hello. My name is Himiko Toga. Would you like to be friends?" Ochako just stared at Sue as she said, "Ochako, you should run. I'll hold her off. At this distance I can keep her distracted while not putting myself in any danger." As Sue grabbed her with her tongue and threw the brown-haired girl back, Ochako yelled, "Sue, you can't be serious, I'm not leaving you." Toga rushed forward, cutting Sue's tongue with her knife as the frog hero leapt back. Toga remarked, "So your name is Sue, how cute," while Sue scowled. She replied, leaping away, "Only my friends call me that." Toga's syringe then pinned her hair to a tree. As she approached Sue and stroked her blood-stained lips, she exclaimed joyfully, "Yay, that means we're friends." Ochako then came up and punched Toga, who sidestepped. Ochako gave Toga a stern look and said, "Avoid her." Toga grinned. Toga cheerfully pointed to Ochako and said, "There's no need to be jealous, you can be my friend too." Following Gunhead's instructions, Ochako maintained eye contact with Toga before moving aside and snatching her wrist. However, recalling what Izuku had taught her during their training sessions, Ochako threw her elbow into the side of Toga's head before slamming her to the ground, jerking her arm behind her back, and kneeling on her spine. As she lay there, Toga said, her eyes spinning a little, wow, that was pretty good. Ochako blushed when Toga asked, did your boyfriend teach you that? Toga grinned broadly. She addressed Ochako, who looked down at her. I can see it all over your face. You have someone you like, someone you love and want to be like, right? She said. Just before footsteps could be heard, Toga used the opportunity to stab Ochako in the thigh with her syringe and draw her blood. But after a while it's not enough to just be like them, you want to be them, she said. Ochako looked up, her hold releasing as she met the glowing nine-tailed Izuku's eyes. Ochako jumped to her feet as Toga thrashed from underneath her, knocking her off her back. Before meeting Izuku's eyes, she said, sorry, I don't feel like getting killed tonight. Instead of focusing on his glowing figure, she noticed the blood splatter on his face, arm, and chest. Her heart pounded in her chest as she hurried away. Izuku knelt down to ask, Ochako, are you okay? Before turning to face Sue, who had left the tree to which she had been pinned. He grinned and gave the two blushing girls a hug while Todoroki and Katsuki looked on. Oh good, you're both okay. Todoroki said, expecting to be interrupted by the blonde, but when he turned around, he didn't see him. Izuku, now might not be the time for that, we need to get Bakugo to a safe place. A masked man carrying a marble from the top of a tree asked, oh, do you mean him? Before bowing, he remarked, my greatest talent has always been sleight of hand. As he leapt away from the kids, the man exclaimed, you've all been a great audience, au revoir. When Todoroki turned back to tell Izuku, he saw a look on the boy's face that he had never seen before. Anger. When Todoroki said, Izuku. Izuku threw himself into the air, causing the earth to crater. Todoroki, Sue, and Ochako shielded their faces from the dust explosion. Mr. Compress leapt from tree to tree until he turned around and saw the glowing boy racing toward him, sending a shiver down his spine. He yelled, give Katsuki back, before colliding with the villain and sending them both to the ground. Twice and Dabi stood in the clearing, watching Toga come into view. Dabi asked, so, how many people's blood did you get? And Toga grinned and clutched her face. As Dabi raised an eyebrow, she giggled and said, only one. You were supposed to get at least 3, why are you so happy about failing? Asked Dabi. From behind the flame villain, the words, yeah you failure, hey take it easy on her Dabi, were uttered twice. She exclaimed joyfully, oh, I just met a really cute boy, I think I might be in love. Twice before something smashed between the three of them, they exclaimed, wait, is it me? Sorry, you're not my type? As the dust settled, they noticed Mr. Compress on the ground with Izuku standing on top of him. Dabi threw a swath of flame at Izuku, who raised his tails to block the attack but was ejected from his captive. Twice exclaimed, hey, I know you. Wait, who are you? Mr. Compress got to his feet, gripping his back. As he stood behind Dabi, who stopped his flame attack, Mr. Compress grumbled, that boy ruined my exit. Izuku was still standing there, his tails barely scorched, and when they pulled away, his glare was visible. Before a dazzling beam of light shot from the left, catching part of Mr. Compress's mask, and another marble popped out of his mouth, Dabi yelled, we need to go now. Izuku's tail shot out, snatching the marble and returning it to him. Dabi yelled, you idiot, which is which? But Compress just grinned back. He showed the marble he was holding and turned off his quirk, saying, I told you didn't I, sleight of hand is my best skill. While the marble in Dabi's hand returned to Bakugo, the one in Izuku's exploded into leaves. As Izuku charged at him, Dabi retreated into the portal and said, good, let's go, Kurogiri. Bakugo snarled, stay back, Izuku. Just as Izuku's form split apart, the boy fell to the ground just inches from his friend before he was pulled into the portal and vanished along with the villains. Before Todoroki, Sue, and Ochako emerged from the forest and saw no sign of the explosion user, Izuku sank to his knees tremblingly, looking at the spot where Katsuki had vanished, and slammed his fist into the ground as Aoyama came out of the bushes to comfort the boy. Aizawa shook his head and watched as the police led the apprehended criminals into custody. Hearing footsteps behind him, he looked at Vlad and said, pinching the bridge of his nose, all our planning amounted to a hill of beans. Before letting go of the other shoe, Vlad rubbed the back of his neck and said, well, you're not wrong, but it could have ended a lot worse. We should count our blessings, I suppose. As Aizawa sighed, Vlad clarified, Principal Nezu wants you and I back at UA once the children are squared away. We're needed for the press conference. Talking his way out of this one was not an option. Looking away, he snarled, fine, I'll get my suit. I hate dealing with the press. He then caught a glimpse of Midoriya, and the pussycats were standing in front of him. Izuku had been of great assistance to many tonight, particularly the pussycats. Aizawa watched, thinking to himself. Mandalay embraced the boy tightly before releasing him, saying, "Thank you so much, Midoriya Kota is safe because of you." She smiled and said, "I don't know how to repay you." However, she noticed the boy's dejected expression, realizing that his thoughts must still be on his missing friend. As she joyfully embraced the boy to her breasts and kissed his cheek, Pixabob exclaimed, "Yeah, you saved my life back there. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come in and saved me." She then let go and petted his head before turning away. As Tiger walked up and clapped his paws on the boy's shoulders, she muttered, "If only you were a few years older. The debt we owe you can never be repaid, Midoriya. Not only did you save Pixie Bob and protect Kota, you also saved Ragdoll from whatever plans that monster had for her. These girls and Kota are like family to me, and I owe you a lot for saving them. If you ever need anything from us, the Pussycats won't hesitate to help. You have my word." Tiger was pounding his chest as Izuku looked up out of the air. "I couldn't save Katsuki though. He was right there, my hand was seconds away from grabbing him. If only my cowl hadn't given out. If only I was faster, if only." Tiger struck Izuku in the chest. Izuku rubbed his chest, looked at the hero, and nodded as Tiger said, "Stop that right now. Every hero has been where you are right now, Izuku, and no amount of second guessing is going to change anything. The past is past, all you can do is change for the future, and believe me, we will save your friend no matter what." As the three heroes left to go with their teammate to the hospital, he said, "Thanks, Tiger." Jiro, Sue, Mina, Toru, and Ochako watched the green-haired boy as Izuku watched them leave. The other four girls nodded as Ochako stated, "I don't think we should tell Deku Momo was hurt, he's really beating himself up about Bakugo." Jiro remarked, "Yeah, at least not right now. Momo will understand if we wait a while." They were watching Kirishima approach Izuku. Izuku turned to the redhead as Kirishima said, "Hey Midoriya, everyone was heading to the hospital to check on Yaoyorozu. You wanna come?" 5 face palms could be heard. "You are an idiot, Kirishima." As the girls observed Izuku, they pondered. Kirishima nodded, and Izuku questioned, "Yaoyorozu was hurt?" Kirishima clarified that she did not see Izuku clench his fist at his words, saying, "Not much, took a blow to the head, but nothing too serious. One of the Class B students helped her get away from the other Nomu thing that was in the woods." As they walked alongside Kirishima, Izuku said, "Sure, I'll come along." As the girl in question turned around with a bandage on her head, the Class A students entered Yaoyorozu's hospital room. Momo waved her hand and said, "Oh, you guys came to visit me? You didn't have to do that, I'm fine." As Mineta leapt to the front of the crowd, Ciro remarked, "Yeah, well, we wanted to be sure. You did take a pretty big blow there." Kirishima's fist in the back of Mineta's head interrupted him as he said, "We even brought you a melon to go with the 2 on your chests." As Ochako sliced the melon from Mineta's unconscious body, he said simply, "Not the time, dude." As Momo rubbed her head, she inquired, "So how are you feeling?" Before All Might and Detective Tsukachi opened the door, she told the class, "A little foggy, but nothing serious. The doctors said I should be free to go by tomorrow." As the students all gave different no's, All Might asked the assembled class, "Oh, sorry, are we interrupting?" As the students nodded, he said, "Well, would it be okay if the detective and I had a word with Yaoyorozu?" As she and the others departed, Mina said, We'll see you later, Yaoyorozu." Izuku was the last to depart. Izuku rubbed her hand and said, "I'm sorry I wasn't there, Momo." He then slid past All Might without saying a word, which the hero thought was strange but explained away as the result of the recent events. The boy walked down the hall before being grabbed off his feet by Detective Tsukachi, who closed the door behind him. Before the red-headed boy slid back towards the room, Izuku turned to see Kirishima there, putting a finger to his lips. Izuku trailed behind the boy, and they could hear Yaoyorozu talking from where they were standing. Before giving the tracker to All Might, Yaoyorozu clarified, "Yes, I made a button and had Yosetsu from Class B welded to the Nomu that attacked us. I can make a tracking device to track the button and the Nomu wherever it goes." For his part, All Might maintained his composure, but he was astounded by Yaoyorozu's foresight in such a life-or-death circumstance. "You have the makings of a true hero, Yaoyorozu," All Might remarked as he accepted the gadget. All Might turned to the door and opened it to reveal an empty hallway, saying, "Make no mistake, we will get young Bakugo back and it will be thanks to you." Tsukachi also bowed before departing. Yaoyorozu sighed as she sat in bed. Before she heard her door open again, she told herself, "I did it. Now they can find Bakugo." Izuku and Kirishima were present when she asked, "Was there something else, All Might?" Izuku looked down at the girl and said, Yaoyorozu, will you make us a tracker as well? Yaoyorozu gave Izuku a curious glance. As Izuku approached her, she questioned, why would you ask me to do that? As Kirishima moved forward, Izuku clasped her hand and said, I couldn't save Bakugo before Yaoyorozu. He was right in front of me and I failed. But you may have just given me a second chance. Please give me a tracker as well so I can fix my mistake. As Kirishima pulled her hand away from Izuku's, Yaoyorozu looked at the two boys and said, It's like Midoriya said. Yaoyorozu, Bakugo is my best friend and when he was being taken I wasn't there to help him. We both failed him and we need to make it right. Do you understand what you're asking, Midoriya? You two aren't heroes. It's against the law for you to use your quirks to harm others. What's worse, you want me to help you do it. What if you two run into the villains or get in the pros' way? I know you're strong, Izuku, your quirk just keeps getting more powerful, but this is too much even for you. The girl turned away from the two. Izuku took a step forward. Izuku looked at him with dark eyes and whispered, I know I'm asking a lot, Yaoyorozu, but please do this, if not for me then for Bakugo. I need to make things right. Izuku nodded, and she turned away from him once more, saying, I need time to think this over. I'd ask you give me that at least. When he and Kirishima opened the door and discovered Iida and Todoroki waiting around the corner, he said, Sure, we'll wait until 10. If you haven't given us an answer by then we'll find some other way. As Iida moved toward Izuku, Todoroki explained, Iida saw you grab Midoriya so we decided to wait and see what you were up to. Iida stared down at Izuku, who gave him a determined look in return. Are you insane? Have you learned nothing from what happened to me? I chased after what I wanted rather than what was right and it cost me nerve damage to my arm and your master his hand. Why would you do this knowing what you know? Iida asked. Because it's my fault. I gave out when I was needed the most. I can't let that stand, Iida. It may be a matter of pride, but I can't sit here and do nothing, and no amount of talking is going to change my mind. Todoroki looked at Izuku and asked, So do you plan on doing this alone? Izuku returned the stare. Izuku responded, if need be, as Todoroki turned to face him. You failed before because you were alone. You ran off leaving the rest of us behind. If you brought someone with you instead of jumping in alone things may have been different, so this time I'll be coming with you. Todoroki responded without hesitation. I will be coming as well, but only to make sure you don't do anything to get yourselves hurt. This is a rescue mission, pure and simple. If we can find and rescue Bakugo without fighting we will do so, if not I will make us retreat by force if necessary. Iida continued as he adjusted his glasses. Izuku nodded after grinning at the boys he had gathered. As the boys left the hospital to give Yaoyorozu time to decide, he said, You're right, I'm going to need all of you. All for One sat in his chair and watched from the bar as Tamura played on his sense of superiority and conceit by appealing to Bakugo. He was at least making an effort to observe, but he was having trouble getting rid of the pain in his back. For starters, he was much older than he looked, but he doubted it was just old age given his longevity and healing abilities. After searching his memory for the cause of this pain, one particular incident that caused him to grit his teeth and feel his back burn came to mind from the history of his experiences. Even though he had buried a number of his brother's successors decades into his career, he had still managed to acquire a talented apprentice. The dual quirk user of fire and lightning was examined by One for All. Years ago, he had discovered the boy and shaped him into the ideal apprentice, the one who would continue his legacy in the future. When he looked up, Kyuubi no Kitsune was standing in front of him as an explosion shook his base and created a huge hole in front of him and his apprentice. With his tails flapping behind him, the blonde exclaimed, All for one, as the two gazed at each other. He waved to his apprentice as the dark-haired young man stepped forward and said, So you've come for me, have you, Naruto Uzumaki? You've chased me all across Japan and all for a friend who no longer wants to be by your side. Sasuke drew his sword and said, He's right, Naruto, this has to end now. However, Naruto immediately attacked All for One with a dazzling display of power and energy. When Naruto slammed his Rasengan into the palm, the villain king got up and held out his hand. However, the force of the blow spiraled up his arm, forcing him back, leaving his right arm useless and covered in blood. As he levitated, All for One exclaimed, Yes, I thought that would work. I found that quirk specifically to counter you. The quirk is called Backlash, and it forces energy back to its source. Now that you've been pardoned the pun, I'll be taking my brother's quirk and yours. He then flew forward and, he believed, punched his hand through Naruto's chest. When One looked, he saw his apprentice's body impaled on his arm. Sasuke turned to face Naruto again. With the light fading from his eyes, Sasuke looked at Naruto and said, I was trying to protect you. The world doesn't need me, but it does need you. All for one yelled, "You fool, you could have had everything," as he attempted to free his arm from Sasuke's body but was unable to do so because the young traitor had his hand tightly grasped. When one looked up to see Naruto gone, he saw light appear above him. Before he could react, spiraling energy tore the flesh from his spine and the clothes from his back, sending him face first into the ground. When one had gotten up from the ground, he discovered that Sasuke and Naruto were no longer there. "You sentimental fool. You'd rather keep your friend's body than destroy me. You'll pay for that weakness, Naruto." All for One slammed his fist against the arm of his chair and jerked in his seat, growling. As he returned his attention to Tamura's predicament, he asked himself, "Why would I think of that right now?" He saw that the boy had somehow gotten away with it and blown the hand from Tamura's face, but instead of throwing the typical tantrum, Tamura was displaying an uncommon display of patience with the boy. "I thought we could be friends, but I guess I was wrong," said Tamura. As the assembled villains prepared to defeat the boy, he yelled, "Fuck yeah, you're wrong, freak. I'm going to be the greatest hero the world over, so you all better surrender now or I'll have no choice but blow your asses to pieces." Just as they were about to do so, there was a knock on the door. Delivery. Izuku stood at the hospital's front gate, his mind jumbled as he tried to organize the crazy thing he was trying to do. He wasn't discouraged, but he was concerned. If he were only putting his life in danger, things would be different, but he also had to consider Iida, Kirishima, Todoroki, and Yaoyorozu. He was still believing when he heard footsteps and looked up to see Momo approaching them. Izuku said, "You've made a decision." The girl nodded, glancing at the four boys before showing them the tracker. Momo said, looking at Izuku, "I made this for you, but I'm coming with you, just like Iida. I will be your chaperone to make sure you don't do something crazy and get yourselves killed." Kirishima exclaimed, "That's great, Yaoyorozu, thanks so much," as Yaoyorozu switched on the gadget and it started tracking the signal after a brief pause. "It's this wa." Izuku dropped his hand to catch the tracker before it hit the ground, and Momo suddenly fell forward into his arm. Before their brains processed what they had witnessed, Kirishima, Iida, and even Todoroki stared in disbelief. When Iida returned to the internet, Kirishima yelled, "Midoriya, what the hell, man?" Izuku hefted the girl into his arms and started to carry her back to the hospital, after which Iida demanded, "Have you lost your mind? Why'd you knock Yaoyorozu out?" Todoroki watched without saying anything until he heard Izuku explain why he did what he did. Although Todoroki was aware that Midoriya occasionally acted impulsively, he would never purposefully harm someone without a valid reason. As he sat Momo on a chair right inside the entrance, he said, "I couldn't let her do this. Iida, I respect the fact that you want to keep us from doing something dangerous, and I know there's nothing I can say to compromise your choice. The same could be said for Yaoyorozu, and I'd rather not put that on her if something does happen to us. By the time she wakes up, everything will be over one way or another." Izuku approached the three as he left the hospital. Izuku ran toward the tracker and said, "Come on, we should hurry." After exchanging glances, Iida, Kirishima, and Todoroki hurried after their countrymen. When Bakugo and the villains in the mahjong bar turned to face the door, All Might materialized in the gap and smashed the outer wall in. He quickly focused on Bakugo as he scanned the bar. Seeing his student unharmed and relieved that he wasn't at Site B caused his heart to calm a little. All Might exclaimed, "We're here, villains," before scuttling away as Kamui Woods strode into the bar and grabbed hold of everyone in the room. With his wooden limbs tightly gripping the villains, Kamui yelled, binding lacquer chain prison. Edgeshot, who had been at the door, slithered in and rendered Kurogiri incapacitated, while Gran Torino charged into the bar, kicking Dabi in the back of the head and rendering him unconscious. Gran Torino said, "Take a nap, kitty, it's past your bedtime," as he touched down beside All Might. Gran Torino had not slowed down in his advanced years, as All Might could still see. With his fingers moving wildly, All Might told the young villain, "It's over, Shigaraki, you've lost." This was his only way to vent his anger toward the man in front of him. "You think this is over? Well, it's not, All Might. You think you've won, you haven't. That smile, I will crush it, along with everything you stand for, because I hate you more than anything in this world," screamed Tamura at the hero with the most. Before turning back to the building they had been staking out for the previous few minutes, Izuku glanced at Todoroki, Iida, and Kirishima in the disguises they had chosen. Izuku noted the abundance of weeds surrounding the doorway and said, "I think it's safe to say that no one's coming, and by the looks of things no one's been here in a while." Izuku crossed the street and said, "There's a narrow alley next to it, we should be able to see inside from there." The other three followed, slipping into the small crevasse and then under a pair of windows. Pulling out night vision binoculars, Kirishima remarked, "Good thing I brought these along." Despite observing the costly piece of equipment, Izuku remained silent. Izuku said, "Iida, let Kirishima on your shoulders so he can get a look." Iida gave Kirishima a leg up, and when he was sufficiently intoxicated, he peered inside and was horrified by what he saw. Kirishima angrily exclaimed, "Izuku, get up here, you need to see this," as Izuku scaled Todoroki's shoulders and peered inside, feeling a chill as he did. There were multiple vats inside the building, and Nomu was in one of them. As Todoroki glanced to the side and saw movement and police, Izuku said, "Nomu." Iida nodded, and Todoroki remarked, "I think the heroes might be here, and since neither of you see Bakugo, we should leave." As Kirishima and Izuku descended, the building was rocked by a powerful kick from Mount Lady caving in the face of the structure. Iida responded, "Yes, I agree, we should let the pros take this from here." A number of Nomu wandered out of the dust as it settled before being seized by Mount Lady. When Best Jeanist entered the building, Mount Lady asked, "Are these things really worth all this?" Before hearing someone in the building, Best Jeanist said, "Don't let your guard down." "Stop right there," Best Jeanist yelled, squeezing the man who had just arrived with his fiber powers. As the hero eyed his captive, Mount Lady chimed in, "Hey, now he could be a civilian, take it easy," to Best Jeanist. As his captive laughed, Best Jeanist remarked, "Read the situation, will you? This is no place for a civilian. If he is one, I'll apologize later, but I highly doubt that." The man, wearing a suit and a full face mask with pipes coming from the front, said, "So these are the instincts of a top hero, quite impressive." The remnants of the building exploded, and Best Jeanist's eyes widened before he reacted. Izuku and his companions hid farther behind the shattered stone wall. Even though Izuku was blind, he was able to identify this person as a monster thanks to his enhanced senses. He appeared in Izuku's mind as a huge blaze of hatred that froze Izuku's blood in his veins. Looking up at the mastermind he had been warned about in the hero meeting regarding the operation to bring down the League of Villains earlier today, Best Jeanist looked up from his spot on the floor. Before All Might took the stand, Tsukachi told the assembled heroes, "Everyone, we are going to launch a full-scale attack on the League of Villains as such, so it's only fair that I warn you that their mastermind might make an appearance. Do not take him lightly, this is a villain who has crossed fists with All Might." The entire room felt the weight of All Might's statement. This is not your run-of-the-mill villain, he is used to operating in the shadows. If he appears tonight, it will be because he feels completely secure. Do not attack recklessly. The man stopped in front of Best Jeanist, who said, "It's you, the master of the League of Villains." As Best Jeanist started to sit up and tried to use the remaining fibers to disable All for One, the masked villain responded, "You continue to impress me, Best Jeanist, being able to clear all your comrades away from my attack in an instant, and still have the strength to stay conscious. I can see you put a lot of work into your quirk, but to answer your question, yes, I am the brain behind the League of Villains. My name is All for One." Before blasting Best Jeanist in the stomach, All for One said, "What grit, but I have no more time for you." A spout of blood erupted from the hole in his stomach, and the hero passed out. Behind their wall, Izuku's fist clenched. All for One, All Might's greatest villain, was standing just yards away, and he needed to take action. When Izuku felt pressure on his chest, he looked down to see Iida's hand holding his shirt as firmly as possible while also holding Todoroki, with the arm of the hand holding Izuku pressing against Kirishima's chest. He shook his head slowly while maintaining eye contact with Izuku. All for One remarked, "I should bring Tamura here before he's taken out of my range." Suddenly, spouts of gray liquid appeared in midair, dropping Bakugo and the League of Villains into the Nomu Lab's wreckage. Bakugo got up and turned to face Tamura after noticing the bodies of multiple heroes scattered about and a big villain standing in front of him. All for One nodded, and Tamura said, "Master, you brought us here? It doesn't matter if you don't succeed this time. Start over as many times as you need to, that's what I'm here for." All for One said, before turning and slamming fists with all might. "Yes, Tamura, I told you I would always be here to help and support you. That's why I brought your team here and that boy." As the shockwave from the two colliding shook the surrounding area's rubble and blasted Bakugo and all of the villains away, All for One taunted, "What happened, All Might? It took you so long to get here." He yelled, "All for One," just before a double air cannon threw him back. "Tamura, get your men and that boy out of here," All for One ordered as Bakugo was surrounded by Tamura and the remaining members of the League of Villains. Bakugo yelled, "Well, come on, you shitheads, I'll have every last one of you." As Toga charged forward to try to stab him, Bakugo exploded the ground in front of her, She then ducked out of Mr. Compress's grasp. When All Might returned to the battle, he headed straight for Bakugo, but All for One's outstretched fingers grabbed him from behind and slammed him into a nearby building. Before All Might attacked him once more, All for One teased, Now All Might, it's been so long since we've seen one another. I'm hurt you're ignoring me for some kid. Kirishima harshly whispered, We need to do something. At this rate Bakugo will be captured again, as Iida pressed his arm closer to him. As Todoroki looked at Izuku, he could almost see the gears in his mind solving the Rubik's Cube problem. We can't All Might already can't fight properly with Bakugo there. If we go in, that'll just be more people he has to worry about. Izuku interrupted the developing argument between Iida and Kirishima by saying, I've got it. Izuku told his 3 countrymen, there's a way we can save Bakugo without fighting. He then went on to explain his strategy. Bakugo blasted twice in the face while avoiding Tamura's rotting touch. Before Bakugo saw a huge ramp of ice materialize out of nowhere and Kirishima and Iida fly up the side of it, he thought to himself, shit, I can't get out of here. They've got me boxed in and All Might is being held at bay by that masked shit. What can I do? Like the villains, Bakugo was stunned as he watched until Kirishima extended his hand in midair. Kirishima called out, come on. Bakugo grinned and, as the villains closed in on him, detonated a huge explosion that sent him flying toward the 2 boys and grabbing Kirishima's hand. Bakugo yelled, took you long enough, as the 3 boys took off. Not so fast. All Might slammed the back of his fist against the villain's face, sending him backwards, ruining All for One's attempt to stop the escaping kids. As Spinner stood in front of Magna, feeling his magnetic powers charge him, Magna yelled, Spinner, Compress, hurry, I'll use my quirk to rocket you after them. Mr. Compress launched himself at Spinner, only to be rebounded and flung after the boys. Mr. Compress exclaimed, the fat lady hasn't sung just ye, before colliding with Mount Lady's imposing face, rendering both the hero and the villain unconscious. Magna exclaimed, come on, twice we can do it again, as the world went dark, and then she felt a blow to the back of her head. Gran Torino called out, that's enough out of you, while perched on Magna's back. With his signature smile, All Might stood proudly and exclaimed, it's over, All for One, you've lost. All for One replied, not yet, All Might, and then he threw his fingers out to Kurogiri and Magna, forcing them to activate their quirks. Toga was staring at the area where the boys had entered when a portal opened behind her. She felt a pull on her body and turned to see all of her fellow villains approaching. She yelled, wait, don't come at me all at ONC. Before being pushed through the portal. Tamura was the last to enter, gazing at his master. He yelled, Master, don't do this, just as the portal shut. As the symbols of evil and peace stared each other down, unaware that another pair of eyes was watching, All for One remarked, well, All Might, it's just the 2 of us now, just like before when I gutted you like a fish and you beat me half to death. I wonder how things will end this time. Izuku Midoriya had scaled one of the few remaining structures to observe the result of this battle. He felt sick to his stomach about this, but he wasn't sure why. All Might gave All for One a look. Even though he hadn't seen him in person for 6 years, All for One still made him shiver. All Might yelled at the villain, who clapped his hands, I won't let you get away this time, All for One. I will defeat you and see that you spend the rest of your miserable life in prison. While All for One taunted the hero, All Might's smile remained unwavering. What a wonderful speech, All Might. You really are quite the orator. Still, I wonder if you can go through with that. It's only 5 kilometers from the bar to here and it took you nearly 30 seconds to arrive. Are you feeling all right, symbol of peace? He asked. Before launching himself at All for One, All Might said, I appreciate your concern, but you should save some of that for yourself. What with that fancy life support mask of yours? Elderly people should take it easy, don't you think? With equal force, the villain confronted All Might, and the 2 locked hands in a devastating clash that shattered the ground beneath them and whipped dust into the air. Before blasting his air cannon at All Might, the hero had to block as he slid across the ground before diving back in. All Might had released his hold first to throw a punch, which All for One ducked from. Texas smash. All Might struck All for One's open palm with his fist. Before All Might felt a ripple in his punching arm that threw the limb back, allowing All for One to execute a right cross, the villain said, impact inversion. The hero was flung to the side, cartwheeling, and then stood up again. As All Might wiped the blood off his lip, All for One questioned, that was quite a weak punch, All Might, are you holding back against me? Pointing up at the helicopter circling overhead and the civilians still in Kamino being evacuated, All for One said, oh, I see, it's because you don't want to endanger your precious fans with your full strength. All Might glared at All for One, who laughed and said, "You heroes have so much to protect, it must be exhausting." As All Might rushed in to throw a punch, All for One brought his hand up to block it, but All Might grabbed it, drove his fist into the villain's face, and slammed him to the ground, shattering his mask and exposing his scarred and eyeless visage. "You have no idea what we heroes have to bear with villains like you around. All you see are tools to be used until they break and then thrown away, but these are living, breathing human beings doing their best to live happy lives. Don't you dare mock them," All Might said. From his spot on the ground, All for One questioned, "Did I upset you? I've heard those words before, maybe not exactly, but each of you always say the same thing. All of you say you're going to stop me, or defeat me, but here I still am. Not Naruto, Luffy, or even your precious master could kill me. Out of all of my brother's successor, only 2 of you have ever come close to achieving his dream of defeating me, and you are counted among that very short list, All Might. I'm sure your master would be proud, the failure that she should be. What an arrogant woman she was, believing that she would be the one to finally defeat me. The fact that she was chosen to be a successor still turns my stomach." All Might gripped All for One's arm with all his strength. Before All Might retreated, All for One questioned, "I've killed all of my brother's successors, and I enjoyed each one, but hers was truly a work of art if I do say so myself. Would you like to hear how pathetic she was as she died?" He yelled, "Shut your mouth," as he was about to punch All for One again, but an air cannon shot him skyward, sending him hurtling straight for the helicopter. Gran Torino caught him in midair as the top hero coughed up blood. Gran Torino warned All Might, nodding, "You're letting him get to you, Toshinori, just like you did 5 years ago. You can't keep falling for this, or this time you'll lose more than your stomach." Before regaining his composure, All Might said, "Sorry, sir, I'll be careful." With his arm bulging with power, All for One threateningly said, "Well, this has been fun, All Might, but it's time we end this. The air cannons I've given you up to now were only pellet guns compared to this one." Gran Torino yelled, "Move, Toshinori." But before All Might could get a clear message, All for One pointed out the onlooker behind him. All for One slammed All Might with all of his might, saying, "Not all of us can move that fast, All Might. Will you sacrifice her like that?" As the news helicopter circled, a cloud of dust lifted from the ground. People all over the world watched the plight of the top hero, but none were as engrossed as the green-haired boy who was hiding close by. The skeletal figure of All Might, dressed in clothing far too large for him, emerged from the dust. As All Might dropped his bloodied fist, All Might mocked, "And there we have it. The true form of the world's greatest hero, hollow cheeks and sunken eyes, truly a pathetic sight." All Might said, his skeletal smile still present, "Say what you want, All for One. Show the world what I really look like. It doesn't change the fact that I'm still their hero, and no matter what you do that won't change." All for One said, "I forgot how stubborn you are, All Might. I should just give up, shouldn't I?" And then grinned as broadly as All Might. All Might looked at All for One, his smile gradually fading as his eyes widened in surprise. "But before I surrender, I should let you know that my student Tamura is your precious master's grandson." All Might yelled, "Why, you're lying," while All for One chuckled. All Might gripped his head as the thought crossed his mind. Now, All Might, I've never lied to you. You know this is exactly what I do. Grooming your master's descendant to hate you and all you stood for." As All Might's knees trembled, All for One said, "Yes, think back to how you trampled over him with that big smile of yours. What would she think of you now?" All for One chuckled at this. She'd be so disappointed in me. I can't believe how he turned out. What's this? It looks like I've stolen some of that heroic pride of yours after all. Don't worry, you won't have to live with your shame for long." All for One replied with a fist. With the combined strength of dozens of quirks, All for One's right arm grew until it formed a monstrous limb at his side. "I'll crush you until there's nothing left with the full power of all the quirks I've collected to now," he yelled. Still in shock, All Might didn't even bother to look up until he heard the woman he had been protecting speak. She yelled, Please, All Might, why you have to win? Please win." As Shigaraki and his master's images flashed through All Might's head. "How could I have allowed this to occur? Master, I'm so sorry. Farewell, All Might." All Might looked up to see Izuku drilling both of his feet into All for One's side before bending his knees and compressing himself before popping back to full height and sending All for One hurtling away to land, skid across the ground, and then plow into a pile of rubble. Shout All for One as he barreled down on the hero, but Izuku struck All for One in the side before his attack could land. "Don't give up, All Might. I know you can win this." Izuku landed on the ground in front of All Might, red steam evaporating from him as he gazed at the top hero. "The world, including myself, believes in you. Take this. All Might took in the moment, seeing Izuku's unadulterated belief etched on his face, and coughed as he pulled himself to his full height. Shouted Izuku pulled the frail form of All Might to his feet and stared him in the face. I apologize, young Midoriya. You're right, I can't lose this battle. As muscles grew on his right arm, All Might said, if you would, young Midoriya, take care of the lady behind us while I finish this. Izuku nodded and grinned. Naturally, All Might. As he sent his tails into the rubble, she weakly shielded her eyes from Izuku's bright form, wrapping around her body and stabilizing the rubble as he pulled her free. She clutched at Izuku's neck, soaking his shirt with her tears, and Izuku whispered, holding her to his chest and taking one last look at All Might before jumping away to safety. You're all right, I've got you, I won't let anything happen to you. Iida slapped his hand into his palm several times, saying, he tricked me. He tricked me, he was supposed to be here with us. Iida, Kirishima, and Bakugo stared at the enormous screen in the plaza they were in, seeing Izuku appear on screen. Of course, only they knew who he was, but it was something else to watch him send All for One flying. The trick, Midoriya. As Kirishima and Todoroki conversed, Iida screamed at the screen, and the reporter's voice emerged from it. A boy hurried in to save the hero just as it appeared that All Might was going to perish, and he is currently evacuating a nearby civilian who is trapped beneath debris. I commend this boy, whoever he is, for his valiant actions, the reporter said. When Nezu, Vlad, and Aizawa saw Izuku on the screen from the UA conference room, they exclaimed, he's crazy. What is he even doing here? Nezu yelled as Vlad turned to face Aizawa, who had a proud and angry expression on her face. That fool is unable to control himself, Aizawa shouted. While Izuku raced off screen, Sue and her younger siblings watched TV in the Asui household. Izuku, what have you done? She cried in her mind as she watched the love of her life put himself in danger once more. Why did he feel the need to go so far? Was a question that all the girls in 1A mirrored, but none of them thought it more intensely than Inko Midoriya, who fervently prayed for her son's safety so she could punish him later. As All for One stood up, a rumble broke out. I've experienced that power 7 times in my life, and I'd know it anywhere. Did you all manage to pass it on? How pathetic. That boy is your heir, and he's here to save you, All Might. What are you teaching him? As All Might approached him, All for One inquired. I'll track him down and reclaim what is rightfully mine after I murder you. You all don't deserve that authority. He ran at All Might and yelled, All for One. You are correct. I am pathetic. My student felt compelled to save me, and I gave him a pitiful look when he did. I will not allow you to kill me until I have atoned for all of my transgressions and ensured that Izuku Midoriya is an even greater hero than I was. I have a lot to make up for. United States of Smosh. All Might yelled, slamming his fist forward as it collided with All for One's. A huge boom shook the ground and shattered the windows around them as paramedics were tending to the woman near an emergency station. Izuku lay over the woman, feeling glass fragments fall on him, and then he turned to see a plume of dust rise into the sky. All Might, Izuku said as green lightning arced around him before he hurried back to the battlefield, where he saw the silhouette of someone in the dust cloud, and as it cleared, a smile appeared on his face as it turned out to be All Might. Izuku shouted, waving until the dust had completely settled and he could see the real horror. All Might dangling from 4 spikes pierced through his chest, which turned out to be All for One's ribs arcing out of his chest. All Might, you never learned how to fight cunningly, and you're sharp as a bone. I had to carefully consider how to kill you because I know how terrifying a hero on the verge of death can be. Izuku's eyes widened as he saw the blood-soaked corpse in front of him, and he heard a primal scream in his head as he slung All Might's body to the ground and the bones retracted into his body. Shout All for One. Using his infrared vision, All for One detected something around the battlefield's perimeter and saw someone's heat signature. Is that you, Izuku Midoriya? All for One asked, smirking before energy blasted from the boy's body swirling around him, blocking his heat signature somewhat. What is that? Those with eyes could see a spiraling cloud of purple energy emanating from Izuku's body, resembling a dense mist that permeated the area before dispersing in a terrifying blast, and Izuku vanished. All for One asked. Izuku stood where All Might had been, but he was different. His eyes had lost all trace of green and were now deep black like an endless void as dark purple energy arced from him like lightning. All for One looked around before feeling someone slap him hard, forcing him to the ground as he cartwheeled away. Oh yes, now that power I am truly familiar with, All for One said, looking at the boy as he spat out blood. My first apprentice and former right hand. Hi, Meliodas, Demon of Wrath. Izuku looked at him blankly as All for One ascended into the air, and All for One laughed. The villain raised a hand to launch an air cannon, but Izuku dodged it and slammed his fist into All for One's palm. Impact inversion. All for One spoke as the force of Izuku's punch was directed back at him, but instead of destroying his arm, it retracted under the force. Izuku stared at him as he reached his apex before the swirling darkness he'd conjured appeared at his back, forming wings that sent him flying at All for One. Before Izuku's fist drove into his stomach, forcing blood from the villain's mouth, All for One exclaimed in shock. The villain started to fly back, but he was caught by a glowing purple tail that resembled Naruto's. Izuku held up his hand as tiny purple flecks appeared in the air above his palm, and All for One coughed as the tail squeezed his neck. The villain moaned in agony before launching a full-body air cannon that wrenched Izuku's tail from his neck, sending the boy in the news helicopter that had fallen nearby to the ground. "Devil's Blizzard," he said as the black flecks shot forth, blasting through everything for one and puncturing him with tiny holes. "You are Meliodas, without a doubt. Have you returned from the afterlife to exact revenge on Elizabeth? You're really angry. You couldn't, so are you going to let this boy kill me?" Izuku got up from the crater he'd made, the cuts and scratches on his body oozing shadow that instantly repaired his wounds. All for One asked as he fell to the ground panting. This fight had been taxing on him, taking on a weakened All Might, and now this was too much. As Izuku assumed the stance for his Mamba Smash, All for One remarked, "Now that's cheating, Meliodas." Izuku's fist blasted forward at All for One, who sidestepped and had to leap forward as Izuku's fist followed him, revealing Naruto's Rasengan. All for One took off flying across the ground, with Izuku's arm pursuing him until All for One drove his fist into the ground, causing it to erupt around him, causing Izuku's Rasengan to slam and shatter the big block of stone before retracting back to him. "You overestimate your abilities, boy," said All for One as he flew at Izuku and grabbed the boy by the neck. "You couldn't defeat me." All for One dropped All for One's arm to the ground after slamming Izuku into the ground and dragging him along it as the villain flew along, only to have the weight vanish from his hand. All for One looked down to see that his entire arm was gone, and there stood Izuku with his arm draped in purple energy that had taken the shape of a blade. When Izuku's face finally changed to a vicious smirk, All for One looked between his severed limb and the boy in front of him. Izuku then rushed forward, slamming All for One into the crater's wall and, once pinned, holding up his hand, gathering a Rasengan that gradually grew larger and larger until it was the size of a car. All for One then watched as the purple energy started to bleed into the spiraling ball, making it even bigger until its very presence created a tiny tornado. "Die," Izuku said before slamming All for One into the Rasengan. The world watched as this battle of monsters ended in a huge explosion that stopped the feed. Izuku stood above All for One in the crater he had made, looking down at the villain, who was oddly still alive. Izuku then knelt on the villain's chest and struck All for One in the face with his fist. "Meliodas, stop. His body can't handle this." He heard voices shouting outside the darkness as Izuku sat in his mind, balled up to his face, crying for his hero's death. Somewhere, Izuku recalled that All Might's master had been a woman, and he wondered if that was her. A woman's voice cried out. As the vision of All Might's mangled and bloody body flashed through his mind, Izuku held his head and said, "I couldn't do anything. All this power and I still couldn't help All Might." Katsuki was correct when he said, "I am nothing but a worthless Deku." "You're not correct, young Midoriya," shouted an all-too-familiar voice as a hand was placed on his shoulder. Izuku looked up into beaming smile of All Might at his prime, over 7 feet tall, rippling with muscles and dressed in his Golden Age costume. "I won't stand for this, young Midoriya. I have benefited more from you than from anyone else. Before you came along, I couldn't think of anyone to give one for all to. A peculiar boy who persisted in moving forward and never gave up. You made me want to be better and gave me exactly what I wanted in a successor." All Might knelt down and gave Izuku a tight hug. "I firmly believe that you, Izuku Midoriya, will surpass me as a hero, but first you must regain control of your authority." Izuku stared down at himself for a moment before grasping All Might's hand as his brilliant yellow shattered the darkness surrounding the two. "I'll be watching over you, young Midoriya, always," Toshinori Yagi said as Izuku was pushed back into his own body. "Don't let my death hold you back. You will overcome this," All Might explained as he stood up and extended his hand to the young hero. "Stop, Midoriya." Izuku glanced up at the crater's edge and saw a variety of heroes standing there, including Endeavor, Edgeshot, and Pixie Bob. He was kneeling on top of All for One, his fists covered in blood, and the villain's face barely recognizable, but Izuku could feel his heartbeat sitting on top of him. "I'm sorry," The last thing Izuku remembered was falling into Pixie Bob's arms as the world went dark, but before he could finish apologizing, something hit him in the back of the head. All of Class 1A marveled at the strength of their class representative, but they were also afraid of what would happen to him after such a well-publicized event. Katsuki gritted his teeth before throwing his cell phone into the wall. "I didn't fucking ask you to save me, Izuku," Katsuki said, as images of Izuku's crazed battle with All for One played on millions of screens around the world. Everyone was wondering who this kid was and how strong he was. He snarled and clenched his fist, knowing that something terrible was about to happen to Izuku as a result of this, because of him. Inko was kneeling in prayer as she watched the news channel's static, which had been showing her son's fight. She prayed that her son would be okay with everything she had, and she felt her heart pounding in her chest. She gripped her chest and made her way to the door, thinking that Ua would have to take him somewhere. Izuku groaned and raised his arm, which felt like it was made of lead, as he slowly opened his eyes and looked up at the ceiling of a hospital room, which was indicated by all the medical equipment at the side of his bed. He heard the sound of a cane and turned his head to see Recovery Girl lying beside his bed in her hero suit, her eyes red and puffy from crying, even through her pink visor. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice came out like gravel. "Recovery Girl?" As the heroine brought out a cup of water with a straw, he rasped and then coughed. As Izuku drank from the straw, feeling the cool water soothe his dry and sore throat, she said, "Here, drink this. It'll give me time to explain." "You've been asleep for 5 days," she said. "It took that long for me to heal you and for your body to recover because you put it through something horrible. I'll answer any questions you have before I let everyone know you're awake so they can arrive shortly. That's how much we owe you," she said, removing the nearly empty cup. "As all might truly as it is now that Kamino has been gone for 5 days?" The Recovery Girl spoke the words for Izuku because he was unable to do so himself. "Dead?" Izuku's throat constricted as memories of All Might flashed through his mind, from his debut video to him seeing off his class to the training camp. Tears streamed down his face as he closed his eyes. "Yes, he is," Recovery Girl replied, wiping her eye as she watched Izuku crumble under the weight of that admission. As the boy sobbed for his mentor and his failure to save him, she whispered, "I know we all feel the same way, son, let it out." Principal Nezu entered the room with Aizawa, and Izuku looked up with bloodshot eyes at the two, seeing his own pain reflected in their faces. Nezu's coat was missing its usual luster, and his black eyes reflected the light of the room like the lifeless eyes of a stuffed animal. The infirmary door opened to reveal Recovery Girl at Izuku's side, as the boy stared down into his blanket as if it held all the answers. As he climbed into a chair across from Izuku's bed and looked at all the get-well cards and balloons, Principal Nezu said, "It's good to see you're awake, Midoriya." He lifted up a large card about the size of himself, with the names of all of Class 1A scrawled on it and even some heroes who had taken the time to sign it. "You've touched a lot of lives, Izuku Midoriya, which is what makes this so hard," Nezu said, sitting down the card, and looked at Izuku, who gazed back at him with dark, nearly lifeless eyes. "Even though you were the sole reason All for One was apprehended, you still committed a crime by taking part in the Kamino Ward incident. You're not licensed, and you're not a hero. It is strictly prohibited to use your quirk to attack someone. In any other circumstance, you would be subject to jail time. However, your actions were broadcast on television, exposing your behavior to the world." Izuku's expression barely changed as Nezu explained, "The police force is not quite willing to take action against you, but there must be a reckoning for your actions." Nezu took a deep breath before continuing. "Izuku Midoriya, I hereby expel you from Ua."
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.